Her Ruthless Russian, the Karev Brothers Series, Book 1, written by Leslie North, read by D.C. Cole. 1. Vlad. Vlad Karev sipped his morning coffee as he leaned lazily against the bus stop shelter across from the O'Connor Fine Arts Gallery. He certainly wasn't expecting the first exhibition he saw to be going on outside of the building.
"And I'm telling you, I want to speak to your supervisor,"
a very feminine voice insisted. Even from where he stood, she sounded at the limits of her patience. Vlad guessed the dispute had been going on long before he arrived.
"I am the supervisor," the man returned vehemently. "I drive and I supervise. Anything you have to say, you say it to me."
A moving van was parked in the gallery loading bay with the ramp down. Two men were in the process of unloading a large bubble-wrapped frame from the trailer. A third man stood in the alley arguing with the red-headed woman carrying a clipboard. Vlad watched as the woman took a tentative step back when the man arguing with her leaned toward her.
"I've been saying it all morning. You absolutely cannot ship these frames with one layer of bubble wrap and some packing tape. This is completely unprofessional. Oh my God!"
The woman interrupted herself as one of the two men coming down the platform dropped the end of his frame. It hit the metal ramp with a loud crack of splintering wood. The movers halted to look to their supervisor for instruction. The latter waved them on without a second thought.
"I'm sorry, but are these wood frames?" the woman exclaimed. "Are you trying to ship me broken wood frames?"
5% discount, the supervisor said, pulling out a cigarette and popping one end into his mouth.
5%.
The man reached out to seize her clipboard. The woman cried out, but when she reached to wrestle it back again, the supervisor shoved her roughly away. Vlad took that as his cue to intervene. Raising his hand, he signaled to his bodyguards to remain in the car before crossing the street without even looking for traffic, his attention solely focused on the scene in the alley. His long strides devolved into a more casual stroll as he came up beside the woman. She turned to regard his arrival with a stricken expression, unwittingly opening her private exchange with the mover to encompass him as well. 50% discount, and she gets to keep the clipboard, Vlad said. The self-described supervisor looked him up and down. He had to look much more up than down.
"Why do I give a fuck what you think?" the man demanded. "Mind your own business and keep walking."
The look Vlad was getting from the woman wasn't much more encouraging. Up close, she was as beautiful and harassed as he had guessed from across the street. Thick, red hair blazed like a firestorm around her neck and shoulders, giving the impression that she had wrestled with it that morning before ultimately deciding to take it down from its restraints. The color of her mane contrasted with the starched monochrome of her white blouse, which was just translucent enough to betray the dark impression of the brassiere she wore beneath it. A smattering of freckles across her high cheeks and button nose filled Vlad with an immediate and unexpected desire to see just how far the constellation extended. Did they cover the rest of her body, her neck, her shoulders? Did her lovers count them before going to sleep on them? Those were the tamest of the thoughts he entertained while looking at her. Even though his eyes were concealed behind his sunglasses, he thought she felt the suggestive weight of his gaze. He watched with interest as a mute flush rose up beneath the freckles whose full territory he was considering.
"Hey, you listening to me, pal?"
the driver demanded. The two movers had returned from inside the gallery, their hands freed from carting the broken frame. They flanked their supervisor, although they eyed Vlad with a good deal more wariness. Vlad turned his attention away from the beautiful woman to eye the three movers with far less interest. The accumulation of their upper body strength was something worth considering at least. These weren't meatheads who zealously pumped iron at the gym. These were men who made their living hauling heavy objects, and they had the practical strength to show for it. "Move whatever remains inside," Vlad instructed, "and apply the 0 to your offered discount." I won't repeat myself."
"Sir, I can take care of this," the woman said uncertainly.
Her tone made it clear she was uncomfortable with his easy command of the proceedings. He thought it likely her discomfort stemmed from the fact that she hadn't been able to tighten the leash on these men herself.
"There's no need for you to get involved," she added. "Why don't you tell the firecrotch to learn how to handle her own business?" the supervisor demanded.
The woman gasped, as if all the wind had been knocked out of her by the crass insult. A meditative moment passed, and then Vlad put his coffee on a nearby ledge and struck out with the flat of his palm. His single-handed shove sent the driver flying backward against the truck trailer. The container rang hollowly at the impact, and the man's shoulder gave a sharp crack to rival the shattered wood frame from earlier, although Vlad was confident he hadn't used enough force to break any bones. The two movers sprang out of the way, and the woman's hand flew to her mouth.
"Oh!"
she exclaimed. "Get a move on," Vlad advised the three men. "Be glad I didn't spill my coffee." The threat in his tone was thinly veiled, and the movers collaborated to unload the items much more expediently after that. A thorough apology from the stricken supervisor preceded a complete refund, and it wasn't long before Vlad and the woman found themselves standing alone in the alley amid a cloud of dispersing exhaust. The truck was gone, carrying with it the three stooges who had given her such a hard time. "Terminate your contract with them," Vlad advised.
"You don't have to tell me twice,"
the woman agreed. Generously, he held out his coffee to her. The woman accepted his offer without a second thought as to what she was doing. Exhaling a long sigh, she raised the paper cup to her lips. In the next moment, she spat its contents out onto the ground.
Is that vodka?"
she exclaimed incredulously. Vlad shrugged. It was as much a morning staple to him as cream was to professionals who had less vital business to attend to.
"You cannot come into the gallery if you are intoxicated," the woman said, delivering her verdict in a clipped procession of words.
Vlad raised an eyebrow. "Can't I?" He didn't bother correcting her assessment of his sobriety. The woman fisted her knuckles on her diminutive hips. Any pair of hands could get lost in a set of curves like that, he mused privately.
"No, you cannot," she emphasized. "This is my family's gallery, and I won't have someone like you. That is to say, there's been enough damage for one day."
There were two details in particular about the woman's comments that Vlad found far more interesting than her refusal to let him enter. One was her personal relationship to the gallery, and the other was her remark concerning someone like him. There was no mistaking the resentment in her tone. It may have been his intention to keep a low profile while visiting the gallery, but this woman saw right through him. Then again, maybe it was the sharp sting of the vodka on her tongue that clued her in.
"Anyway, we're closed,"
she continued as she turned to go. His first sight of her had been from a distance, but he had yet to see her from behind. Vlad tipped his sunglasses to take in the view. Long, shapely legs stretched themselves to the limit of her slate gray pencil skirt, hugging the rolling cleavage of her tight end. Now his thoughts about what lay beneath this woman's clothes were anything but tame. He was moving before he even knew he was in pursuit. Vlad reached out a hand and caught the heavy door, pulling it open with ease. Looking over his shoulder, he watched his bodyguard turn and return to the car. His men were good at their job, but given recent events, they were more cautious than usual, which annoyed him. He was more than capable of taking care of himself in most any situation. Turning back to the door, he followed her inside. The woman walked double time, casting a hasty glance over her shoulder as his long strides ate the distance between them.
"I said we're closed," she snapped.
She was as brave in her dealings with him as she had been with the three movers. The fact that she wasn't afraid of him, especially considering her hint that she knew what he really was, made Vlad much more willing to push the boundaries of their interaction. "I'm not here to look at art," he replied. He wasn't used to having doors closed on him. He also wasn't used to hearing the word no. especially from a woman. I'm here to speak to the owner. You just told me you're an O'Connor.
I know what you're here about, Mr. Mafioso.
She stopped and turned sharply on her heel, crossing her arms beneath her breasts. This new view from the front was enough to halt Vlad in his tracks. Luckily, she didn't appear to notice where his eyes were directed. He was certain him appraising her like she was one of the pieces she kept on display would have further hurt his chances of getting answers. I highly doubt that. His voice was cold enough to chill the faint wisps of steam still rising from what remained of his coffee. It was a new tone of voice, one the woman hadn't heard before, but she didn't shrink from it. If anything, she looked suddenly curious, and curiosity could lead to a potential opening if gentlemanly manners couldn't.
I know what you're here about. Money, she stated. Specifically, you're here about the money that my family was foolish enough to accept from Sergei Karev, who I assume is your boss. How is he, by the way?
She might as well have fired a bullet point blank into his chest. If he had not been expecting this reception, then Vlad certainly hadn't expected to be the one to deliver the news. His lips thinned into a humorless smile. Dead. You could see that the revelation stunned the capricious, curvaceous woman. Her steely expression faltered, and she blinked her big brown eyes. The hard front she had been putting up all but disintegrated.
I didn't know, she confessed. How? When?
One of these questions Vlad wanted answered for himself. Until then, a month ago, he replied. I am surprised the news hasn't reached you.
No, it hadn't.
Her breast swelled as she clenched her arms.
I'm guessing Father knew, but he must have been keeping it from me. Not just to avoid an I told you so, but to protect me. He knows how worried I've been about this whole arrangement.
The woman unlaced her arms, only long enough to reach out and straighten a nearby vase. Vlad watched her from behind the dark shield of his sunglasses. Was that a nervous tell? And was this all a show for him? Was it possible this woman was only feigning ignorance? Or had she really not known that the Pahan and her gallery's primary investor was murdered? Was it possible she knew, too, about the folded note secreted inside his pocket that her father had sent to Sergei the day he died? For now, he avoided giving voice to any of his more private, pressing questions. "What's your name?" he asked.
Madison O'Connor, she replied almost reluctantly. What's yours?
Vlad Ivankov Karev.
Karev? Wait, Karev? She echoed.
Vlad didn't bat an eye, didn't tip his sunglasses, didn't give away any physical indication that her surprise at his identity was news to him. He had guessed as much from their first meeting and her dismissive treatment of him. He tried not to take it personally, considering he hadn't been aware of her connection to the gallery either. If anything, he found her disrespect refreshing. Sergei was my employer. He was also my father. Madison O'Connor's expression was a shuffling deck of emotions. He thought he saw a look of remorse for his family tragedy flash across her face before it was replaced in the next instant by a look of intense thoughtfulness. Clearly, this woman didn't like that his family business was so deeply entangled with hers. Vlad couldn't tell if she was deciding whether to be cunning, but he was willing to find out. "Shall we continue this conversation somewhere else?" he suggested.
Yes, I think that's a good idea, Madison said as she turned away. This way to my office, Mr. Karev.
Vlad's mouth, the same one that had voiced the idea so swiftly, met with Madison O'Connor's stamp of approval, flexed slightly, inching toward a smile. It wasn't the only stamp the woman left with him. As he followed after her, he rotated his coffee cup idly, musing on the light lipstick print left over from their earlier exchange outside. His wasn't the only mouth met with approval.
2. Madison. Madison O'Connor's office was as neat and orderly as the woman who entered it. At least the resemblance between worker and workspace would have been apparent on any other morning. Now, with her fox red hair down and her makeup non-existent, Madison felt more like a postmodern expressionist painting splashed across her minimalist office. Or, given her current company, maybe surrealism was more appropriate. Not that she understood any of the movements. She wasn't even sure there was one she preferred over the other, to be honest. If she didn't fit into the stuffy environment of her office, then Vlad Karev was definitely out of place. She turned in time to see the man lightly shoulder-check the door frame as he entered and keep moving, as if he was beyond noticing how ill-prepared the world at large was to accommodate him. He was one of the tallest men Madison had ever seen up close, at least half a foot taller than her 5'7" frame, and his shoulders were sloped and broad. He wasn't bulky, but muscular, so muscular that his attempts to dress inconspicuously fell miserably short. She could clearly see from the thickness of his neck all the way down to his denim-clad thighs that he was strong, and that strength was weaponized. She doubted the V-neck and jeans were how he usually dressed. She had seen enough of his type to know he probably had a closet full of black suits at home. Half of those were probably steadily revolving between dry cleaners in an effort to banish the bloodstains that were the hallmark of his cruel business. They were all wolves in sheep's clothing, and she was the family bloodhound who could sense them coming from a mile away. Too bad her parents hadn't listened to her when she first barked the warning. She couldn't deny there was something deeply sensual about this latest visitor. He exuded an effortless sexual charisma that she had never observed in any of his predecessors. Vlad had an animal magnetism she couldn't ignore. He reminded her of a nocturnal predator she had the good fortune to meet in the daytime, more ready to languish and listen than given to any darker instincts. Madison gestured toward the empty chair across from her desk, and Vlad sat down with leonine ease. Beneath the warm light of her office, she could see that his haircut was expensive and that his blonde hair was natural. He wore it straight and slicked back from his chiseled face. When he removed his sunglasses, his eyes were a startling blue. His unfettered gaze trained on her was like a punch to the stomach. She dropped down into her office chair with a winded exhale that had nothing to do with taking a load off from her troubles. Something told her they were only beginning. "Can I offer you a cup of coffee, Mr. Karev?" The gesture came automatically. She watched as he set his paper cup down on the desk and tried not to wince openly at her blunder. "Vladimir is fine, Miss O'Connor," he said. "And something tells me you don't serve it the way I like." "Something tells me you're right." Madison pursed her lips, remembering how the vodka had set a slow-burning fire to her unsuspecting taste buds. It hadn't been unpleasant, just surprising. "You introduced yourself as Vlad before. Is it all right if I call you that?" "Please," he invited. She didn't offer him similar permission to use her first name, and he didn't appear to expect it in return. "Great. Now that we are acquainted, do you mind telling me why you're here?" she asked. "Unless it was to deliver the news about your father, which I'm sorry to hear, by the way." She wasn't, and she had a feeling Vlad knew as much. She couldn't afford to be tender-hearted where the Russian Mafia was concerned, and she didn't think this man would hold it against her. There was nothing outwardly tender about him. The man was as hard as the statues out in the gallery. "I like to keep an eye on the family business," he answered her simply. "My family's business, you mean," she said. In the next moment, she cursed herself for her impulsive correction. She wasn't going to make the sort of headway she needed if she kept letting any territorial feelings get the better of her. Vlad arched a brow above his hooded eyes in bland amusement. "As you say," he replied, "but we are partners, and I'm afraid a personal visit from me was long overdue." From the outside, there had never been a question about what Vlad was, not to Madison.
Despite this, she detected no trace of a Russian accent, which only further aroused her interest in the enigmatic man sitting across from her. Was he from overseas originally, and did it serve him to hide the fact? His English was crisp, even elegant, but it was his sophisticated arrangement of words when he spoke that made her curious of his origins. He seemed a walking contradiction, like he had only recently strolled out of a time when men bashed women over the head with a club, but then gone on to receive an Ivy League education. She watched as he drummed his fingers on her desk meditatively. He wore a light jacket over the V-neck, the sleeves of which ended below his wrists. But even this wasn't enough to conceal the presence of what she assumed were mob-related tattoos. They snaked towards his knuckles like the tendrils of some dangerous vine. The ink was faded, and she deduced that he must have had them for a long time. But he couldn't have been more than, 30? Why was she even thinking about this? Why was she also thinking about how far the tattoos might extend on his body and wondering how many women knew the answer? Don't be ridiculous, Maddie. Who even had thoughts like that? Certainly not the man sitting across from her. Hell, she hadn't even wanted to let him through the door when she first met him, and now she was letting herself imagine him naked? She absolutely would not blush in his presence. She refused to. With his watchful eyes trained on her, there was no way he would mistake or misinterpret exactly what she was thinking. But maybe she hadn't lost all reason after all. Maybe there was an opportunity here, and her thoughts were leading her in the right direction. It was worth a shot. If you'd like to take a look at the ledger, it's stowed here, Madison offered as she rose. She turned away from her guest and bent over at the waist, pretending to preoccupy herself with the combination on the safe. She understood all too well the view she was providing him. I keep 2 of them. One sits on my desk, and the other collects dust inside here. Let's just say there are discrepancies between the 2. She peered around the side of her right hip as she said this. Vlad's eyes were fixed raptly on her rear end, to the point that she wasn't even sure he heard her. It sent an electric thrill racing through her. She had never tried anything like this before. She wasn't used to putting herself on display. She hadn't even been certain it would work. Now it appeared to be working too well. The intensity of his gaze was doing things to her physically that she was completely unprepared to handle. I mean the figures, Mr. Karev. She half-heartedly tried to call his attention back to their conversation. Vlad. His voice sounded tight as he corrected her. And I am familiar with figures, Miss O'Connor. Madison hid a smile as she turned back to the safe. If she appealed to Vlad as a woman rather than as a reluctant business partner, maybe she stood a chance of getting close to the man. The Russian Mafia was notoriously insular, but surely they had to date outside the family pool. And who said anything about date, anyway? Her brain worked quickly. If she could get someone at the head of the Karev family to open up to her about things he shouldn't, maybe even unwittingly provide her with some hard evidence concerning what they were really doing, then she could use that as leverage to sever all ties between her family and the mob. While the idea of blackmailing anyone filled her with a sick dread, she also knew that she was willing to do anything to save her parents from their own mistakes. Her father had been tricked into taking the investment from Sergei before he knew where the money was really coming from. And now Carson O'Connor desperately wanted out. Her mother hadn't taken his decision well, and the years under the Mafia's thumb had taken its toll on her. She'd been in and out of the hospital recently. Madison felt certain that the only way to get the Mafia to back off out of their business was to start speaking in a language these criminals understood. Maybe then her mother would slowly return to her old self. To do that, she needed to appeal to Vlad, and she needed to start thinking like the vixen her red hair made her out to be. She needed to get back on the subject of figures. Really?
she mused aloud. How familiar with them are you, would you say?
I have a master's in finance from MIT, Vlad replied. This revelation took Madison by surprise. She rose up in astonishment and wound up banging her head on the underside of one of the taller shelves. Her skull throbbed in the aftermath, and she raised a hand to it with a little moan, clutching the ledger in the other. "Are you all right?" Vlad asked. If she had been surprised to find the man watching her while she displayed her assets to him, she was even more surprised to find he'd half risen out of his chair in the aftermath of her clumsy maneuver. Madison waved him off as she rejoined him, blushing crimson and glad that her hair was disheveled enough to hide her cheeks.
Yeah, happens all the time, she confessed.
She slid the ledger across the desk to him and decided that was the end of that. Even if she had been succeeding before in her seduction of Vlad, there was no way the man would be at all aroused by her after her clumsiness. Better to stick with what she knew from now on. "You seem uncomfortable in your own office," Vlad commented as he flipped the ledger open. She instinctively bristled, but she couldn't deny that what he said was true, and probably obvious. "Then again, maybe it's only my presence making you uncomfortable."
"You don't make me uncomfortable." The protestation escaped her lips before she had time to censor or reflect it.
Madison realized it was the truth. Vlad didn't make her uncomfortable, at least not in the way she thought he meant. Then again, an amused flash of his steely blue eyes made her second-guess her own assumption. A sexual being like Vlad had to have some idea of what he did to the women in his vicinity. "Really?" He didn't sound doubtful, but he didn't sound altogether convinced either. Madison sat back in her desk chair and crossed her arms, pressing her tongue to the inside of her lower lip as she tried to match his unflinching gaze. "Then, why don't you have dinner with me?" He flipped the ledger closed without looking and slid it back to her.
"What, like tonight?"
She felt her eyebrows lift in surprise at his offer. "I find that business pairs well with good food, don't you?" Vlad asked. She could detect no deception in his blue eyes, but then again she couldn't see very far past their stark color to the intentions that might lurk below the surface. "And drink, of course." "We seem to be all out of those this morning," Madison observed as she detected a smirk on his lips before it disappeared. "So you're proposing a business meeting with me, Vlad? And where might I expect us to conduct our business this evening?" "Marivana, 7 o'clock, Vlad said as he rose. "I'll send a dress over."
That won't be necessary," Madison blustered as she stood up also.
"Not necessary, but a pleasure I trust you won't deny me." The Russian's lips flexed in a grin, revealing perfect ivory teeth. "I'm not used to being refused, Miss O'Connor."
"I can see that,"
she grumbled as she reached down to straighten her pencil holder. A rebellious part of her wished that she had turned his invitation down flat. "I will send it to the gallery's address an hour before dinner. Don't be late," Vlad advised as he exited out the office door and out of her life, for now. Once she had assured herself she was alone, Madison collapsed back into her chair and buried her face in her hands. What was she doing? She should be running for the hills, or at least running to the nearest police station. But that was the problem. She had no concrete proof that Vlad Ivankov Karev and his family were doing anything illegal by investing in her family's business. She needed to get on the inside track and earn his trust, and trust like that wasn't forged overnight. No, it was forged over a series of nights by spurious women in crime-financed dresses. She needed to make a phone call.
"Don't go,"
Savannah blurted out.
"Madison, I'm begging you. You have no idea how in over your head you might be getting with this guy. Isn't that the risk you take any time you go on a date with someone new?"
Madison countered as she got into her car. She held her cell phone pinned between her ear and shoulder as she fished for her keys. She tossed the contract paperwork with the gallery's movers into the empty seat beside her.
I thought this wasn't a date, Savannah mused on the other line. At least, that's what you told me 3 times already. Well, I lied. The man is a walking work of art. Why shouldn't I enjoy myself while I'm contemplating ways to blackmail him into leaving my family alone? Madison's face burned as she stabbed the key into the ignition. Maybe calling her best friend had been a mistake. Then again, who better equipped to handle the details of what she was about to do than Agent Savannah Casillero of the Federal Bureau of Investigation? Are you referring to his tattoos? Because those aren't just for show. I know, she interrupted, before her friend could lecture her. I was referring to his body. Seriously, the man looks like he was sculpted from stone. Well, you suck at lying, Savannah reminded her. And let me tell you, you're about to find yourself heaped in lies and deception. So if you insist on seeing this guy tonight, keep in mind that his heart is probably as hard as the rest of him. So don't for 1 second think that this will be easy. I know, I just feel so sleazy, Madison confessed as she steered her car out into the block. Isn't it possible to go through with my plan and still be me? Can't I be a kick-ass, powerful warrior woman who fights for her family without lying, cheating, and flirting her way to victory? I think you're going to have to find that out for yourself and report back to me, Savannah replied. Because if there's a way to have it all and win without compromising at least some truth, I sure as hell haven't found it. It wasn't the first time that Madison had wondered what Savannah went through on a day-to-day basis. She never asked out of respect for her friend's career, and Savannah rarely divulged anything. It was a strange friendship from the outside, she supposed, but Madison wouldn't have traded it for anything. Listen, Savannah said suddenly, no matter how charming or sexy this guy might be, never forget that he's still dangerous. He's probably killed people. I know, Madison mumbled. Believe me, one look at him and it's obvious. But no buts, Madison. Your family and your ties to the gallery can't protect you from them, her friend pressed. This is a seriously delicate situation, Maddie. Just do me a favor and be careful. Madison ended their conversation with permission to go forward with the date, which was better than how she began it. Still, she didn't take Savannah's warnings lightly. The woman was a federal agent with the Blood Diamond Task Force. She had practically written the book on danger herself, or at least contributed to a few of the meatier chapters. Vlad Ivankov Karev was bad news. He wasn't even late-breaking news, and Madison knew better than to get caught up with a man like him. But she couldn't resist the temptation to sample some danger, even if for one night. Chapter 3. Vlad. Vlad was a regular at the bookstore. It wasn't because he was anything resembling a great reader. In fact, he couldn't recall a time outside of college that he had actually finished a book. But his brother Dmitri was the proprietor of the store. Vlad would be the first to admit he looked out of place among the stacks of moldering tomes. As he pretended to browse, sunglasses fixed firmly in place, he tuned a half-hearted ear to what his brother had to say. He would never admit it out loud, but Dmitri Karev was the closest thing Vlad had to a voice of reason most days. You going to buy something today? His brother tipped his reading glasses in Vlad's direction. He was propped up behind the counter, one long leg crossed over the other. Dmitri shared Vlad's chiseled features and blonde hair. The two tended to resemble the Karev side of the family more than their older brother Maxim. But Vlad privately disapproved of Dmitri's adherence to hipster fashion trends. He wore his own hair close cropped along the sides with a longer strip down the middle, culminating in a small top knot that Vlad could not understand the point of. If the bookseller was trying to attract women with his choices, what he might try first was actually stepping outside his store. Sorry, all out of money, Vlad replied. Bullshit. Dmitri did not sound at all surprised by his brother's response. At least you better not be, considering you already agreed to buy that O'Connor girl a dress and take her to the goddamn Mari Vana tonight. Vlad said nothing,
Instead, he keyed a pin into his phone and hit send on his order for the dress delivery. A clinging black number was exactly what he wanted to see adorning his adversary when she came to meet him tonight. He intended to know more about her every tight dip and generous curve before their evening together drew to a close. He may as well lay as much groundwork as he could in advance to give himself the advantage. You come here looking for me every other week. You should take my advice for once and listen to me. I'm older than you, Dmitri pointed out. Vlad snorted. By a year. I was also married for 5, Dmitri stated, as if either of them needed reminding of the fact. Lily's sudden death had been the catalyst for Dmitri leaving the family business half a decade ago. Vlad still couldn't understand how their father let him go, but he had never been in the habit of questioning Sergei's decisions, not like his brothers were anyway. So, I think I speak from a level of experience when I say, you need to take a step back and enjoy the finer things, Dmitri continued. The lone wolf thing looks good on you, Vlad, but it isn't healthy. You're 30 years old. You might want to start thinking seriously about what the next step is. This woman, Madison O'Connor? Dmitri leaned back in his chair, rotating a pen between his fingers. Maybe you should, actually go on a date with her. What do you think I'm doing? Vlad asked as he browsed the shelves inset into the wall beside his brother. I flirted. I invited her to dinner. She said yes. What you described is not a date, Dmitri insisted. It's a dressed-up interrogation. You're pumping her for information on Dad's death. And if you can find the time to inject some sex into the proceedings, I suppose you think you can use that to fill up your meaningful human relationships quota. A crude smile played across Vlad's lips. You're the one who suggested I pump her. Dmitri laughed. Yeah, I suggested nothing of the sort. And you better clean up your language before you go to meet this girl. You want me to let a woman into my life, Vlad reminded him. So, I'll do it on my own terms. You aren't going to let her in at all, Dmitri snapped. I don't know why I bother trying to talk to you about anything outside of the family business. Seriously, Vlad, when are you going to figure it out? Even Maxim got out while he still could. Don't talk to me about Maxim, Vlad warned, turning away from the shelves. The wound his other brother's defection had left was still fresh. You want to know why I work so much? Maybe you should ask Max who had to take over his responsibilities when he left. You're letting your obligations consume you, Dmitri said. It's been worse since Dad passed. You should take this time to reassess what your life could be. Father didn't pass, Vlad growled. He clenched his fists at his sides. He was murdered, and if he's anything, he's lucky he isn't alive to see how ungrateful his sons are. You're not the only one suffering. Dmitri was standing now, his aggressive posture mirroring Vlad's own. The bell above the front door chimed to indicate the arrival of a customer, but neither brother broke from their standoff. The door rang again as whoever it was quickly exited the establishment. Forgive me for not wanting to bury another member of my family, Dmitri stated. Vlad's smile was nasty. Is that what you want? I had no idea. From where I'm standing, it looks like all you want to do is sit behind that desk and keep jerking it to Dostoevsky. Like you fucking know who that is. It wasn't a comeback worthy of a punch, but Vlad wasn't feeling especially judicious. He flew at Dmitri, and his brother took a step out from behind his desk to meet him. Vlad's fist cracked against the hard back cover of the book Dmitri had been poring over, rebounding off the improvised shield. He barely registered the pain in his knuckles. He drew his fist back and gave it a shake, and Dmitri dropped the book. His brother was on him in the next instant, and Vlad's blood sang as he found himself thrown violently back against the shelves, a shower of rare volumes raining down around him. This was the Dmitri he remembered growing up with, the one who wouldn't hesitate to put the youngest Karev in place should he step out of line. He just hoped his brother was prepared to redecorate in red. Boys, a familiar voice thundered from the front of the store. The two brothers froze and blinked at one another. Their response to the voice was instinctive, and they halted their fight immediately, although Dmitri still had his fist clenched over Vlad's shirt collar. Vlad raised his hands in reluctant ceasefire, and they broke apart as Igor Ivankov strode into the bookstore. "Uncle?" Dmitri said in surprise. He took a step back from Vlad and released him. Vlad bent to retrieve the brutalized book as their uncle joined them. Igor Ivankov was a sharply dressed man in his middle age, brown-haired and brown-eyed, unremarkable in appearance save for an eclectic collection of pocket squares he rotated out every day. He was the more relatable, more reserved foil to their recently deceased father, although that didn't make the man himself any less dangerous. If anything, Vlad admired his uncle's easy, understated approach. He was the last of the family that Vlad felt true kinship to. "Dmitri," Igor raised his broad, scarred hands in approval of his nephew, championing the name as it was meant to be said, colored by a thick Russian accent. "Please, boys, let us hold off the fighting. This family has been through enough already. Your father would be ashamed to see the two of you reduced to this." Vlad observed the flush of shame creep across his older brother's face. Unlike Dmitri, Vlad had no qualms with making their quarrels physical, but he let his brother feel responsible for the escalation all the same. He handed Dmitri the book he had recovered, and his brother nodded in thanks before returning to stand behind his desk. "Vlad," Igor greeted him with a tone of respect shared between professionals. Vlad returned his uncle's nod. "I am surprised to find you here." "You caught me on my way out, Uncle. I was just leaving." "He has a date tonight," Dmitri volunteered. Vlad silently cursed his brother. It was either deny the other's claim and prove Dmitri right, or risk coming across as distracted to his uncle. "I am following a lead," he said, darting a cold look toward his brother. "I suspect I might hear something new over dinner. I'll report back with what I learn if I think it'll serve the investigation." He fingered the note to Sergei hidden in his pocket. He had yet to divulge its existence to anyone, and he wondered if he should now. No, better to track the note from O'Connor to its source, or at least as close to the source as he could get. He watched his uncle's quizzical expression fold into one of sympathy. There it was, the familial feeling that came much more easily to him than it ever had to Sergei. Vlad wasn't sure he welcomed its appearance now. He was not the Maichik, the boy that his uncle still referred to in the heat of a moment. "You should go on this date," Igor instructed. He lifted his hands again, this time in acknowledgement of the man Vlad had become. "Go. Have fun. Have drinks and have women if you must." "My father is dead," Vlad said. "I'll not rest easy until I know why." "Believe me, Vladimir, I have not forgotten." "I have not forgotten." Igor's face darkened like a summer storm, and Vlad felt some reassurance in seeing the man's enduring feelings about his brother's murder appear out in the open. "But I need you to stay focused. Now, more than ever. There is only one Karev left in the Bratva." Vlad didn't need to look to Dmitri in that moment to know his brother's discomfort. But facts were facts. Of the three brothers, he was the only one who still remained in the family business. "I need you to focus on your obligations. Should a beautiful woman divert you on occasion? Igor shrugged his shoulders. "But something like murder? No. I would prefer that you leave the investigation to me." Igor's eyes hardened. "These things take time. For justice to be served, my associates and I need more time." "It's taken too much time already." Vlad didn't care if he came across as disrespectful. He'd had about as much of his fractured family as he could take for one day. They had been much more reduced since Maxim's defection, and even more so since Sergei's death. He appreciated that his uncle was doing everything within his power to see that revenge for the family was served. But Vlad was impatient to find and personally deal with his father's executioner. "Trust me, Vladimir," Igor continued as he settled a hand on Vlad's shoulder. "You and I both want the same things." An image of Madison O'Connor flashed unbidden across Vlad's mind's eye, an image he was quick to suppress. He would see her again in only a few hours' time, and then he was certain he would get exactly what he wanted. Madison O'Connor met Vlad at Madison exactly on time, drawing much more than Vlad's attention when she entered. She strolled through the front door with confidence and purpose, even though he had the impression that morning that she had never been there before. She spotted him almost instantly and bypassed the hostess, allowing her long, shapely legs to carry her in measured strides across the room towards him. He was standing before he knew what he was doing. His nostrils flared derisively at his own eagerness, but he didn't budge an inch to correct the instinct. He felt certain that it was a gentleman and not the mafioso who stood a chance of extracting information from Madison O'Connor. She looked taken aback by his physical appearance, and he tried to suppress some of the same feelings as they threatened to overcome him. If he greeted her like a queen, it was the least she deserved. She was a vision in red. Her luxurious long hair styled in pin curls that draped her bare and, yes, freckled shoulders. Her candy apple red dress sheathed her body as well as if she had been sewn into it. It may as well have been the long-lost Grand Duchess Anastasia gliding into Madison for all the reaction she was getting. There was no denying she looked beautiful, but there was also one glaring problem. "Where is the dress I sent over?" Vlad inquired. It did not occur to him that those were the first words exchanged between them since that morning, and what passed for his greeting. "Don't tell me it wasn't to your liking."
"I didn't have time to stop by the gallery," Madison said hastily.
Vlad carried himself around the table in one smooth movement, drawing the woman's chair out for her. The gesture appeared to surprise her as much as seeing him in a suit had. She flushed, tipping her head down in a failed attempt to prevent him seeing, and settled herself into the offered seat. "You're lying." He let his faint amusement at the fact override his condemnation. Madison O'Connor's flush deepened all along her pretty freckled nose, and Vlad knew he was correct. "You're a terrible liar."
"If you must know, it was to my liking," she confessed, "but it was very short, extremely short."
Her blush began working its way down her neck as he watched with interest.
"I didn't think they'd let me in here wearing something like that. They'd have to knock a star off at least."
"You did your research," Vlad noticed. He signaled a passing waiter with a vague stroke of 2 fingers. The waiter scurried off to place the wordless order at the bar. Vlad's family was known at Madison, and it went without saying that they were always treated well here.
"So did you. How did you know my measurements anyway?" Madison cocked an eyebrow at him. "Don't tell me you knew just by looking at me."
"I can tell a lot just by looking at you," Vlad said, simply to watch her blush again. It was amazing the responses, the signals the woman gave off without knowing what she was giving away. He doubted she would last a day in his world. Yet here they were. 2 worlds on a collision course, neither willing to back down or correct their cataclysmic trajectory. The waiter returned with a flight of expensive vodka samples. Madison's eyes snapped to the board as it was placed before them, and Vlad felt an unexpected flare of pride at her clear approval of his choice. While his intent was to interrogate the woman, as his brother had chided him, she was also one of the most beautiful women he'd ever met, even if it was obvious that she didn't have a clue how alluring she was. He had hoped to discover a different woman outside of the office, and he was not disappointed. She was like a ruby, slowly bearing new facets of herself for his appraisal. "May I call you Madison?" He surprised himself with the question.
"You may," she acquiesced. "Shall we toast?"
Vlad tipped a shot glass to her. "To our continuing business partnership."
"To Sergei Karev," Madison returned.
Something in his chest clenched at her words, a sensation he hadn't felt in a long time. He wouldn't go so far as to say it was his heart that responded to her words, but it was something, an emotion he had thought long dead and buried. He narrowed his eyes, not to glare, but to study. He detected no trace of irony in her words, not even a veiled derision at the mention of his father. It was no secret to him that Madison O'Connor resented his family's involvement in her business. She had made it as clear as the distilled liquid placed in front of them that she thought her life was better off without members of the Bratva circling her territory like encroaching wolves. So why was she here with him now? Surely it wasn't to take advantage of an expensive dinner paid for with the very money she so resented. Vlad watched her over the top of his glass, forgetting to join her as she raised the vodka to her plump, pillowy lips and swallowed it down without so much as a flinch. He imagined how the alcohol must burn that luscious mouth and the delicate throat beneath, but she never once betrayed the discomfort that had been on full display when she drank his coffee that morning. She never broke eye contact with him either. Interesting. Maybe Madison O'Connor wasn't an effective liar, but she was still able to keep things hidden from the outside observer. His drink forgotten, Vlad found himself leaning across the table without thinking.
Vladimir,
A familiar bell-like voice rang out across the restaurant.
they told me you were here, and you didn't even drop by the back to say hello. Naughty boy.
Vlad eased back in his chair once more, as if to make additional room for the enormous personality now mincing toward them. Madison started slightly as a tall, gorgeous woman strode from the back of the restaurant and appeared beside their table. The blonde paused just short of pulling up a chair and seating herself down beside them. Instead, she lorded over their private meeting with one hip cocked and an expensively manicured hand posted up on her waist as if to accentuate what she considered to be one of her best assets. The woman was exotic in a European way, and it wasn't just her accent that betrayed her Russian roots. Her eyes were a twinkling blue, almond-shaped and wide-set. Her nose was perfectly symmetrical and economic, leaving plenty of room for her expansive high cheekbones and easy dimpled smile. "Katya," Vlad acknowledged. His eyes scarcely strayed from the face of the redhead still seated across from him. Madison's dark eyes flickered between him and their intruder searchingly. It occurred to him that she might instinctively detect the history between him and the proprietress of Marivana, a history decidedly less innocent than the present cool relationship on display. Katya was certainly making it appear like they were on much closer terms than they actually were, and Vlad had little doubt that Madison was the intended audience for her show.
You never call me.
Katya pouted lips just as large, but far less visually magnetic than Madison's.
You know I will get you in any night. Special. Why not your usual booth?
She demanded, sweeping her free hand toward the back of the room.
You don't feel like getting comfy this evening?
My plans are wide open, Vlad replied, still looking at Madison. To an extent. He wanted to make it clear that Katya did not in any way factor into his newfound willingness to improvise. The intensity of his gaze finally succeeded in drawing his date back to him, and he was rewarded with a hesitant, appreciative smile. Madison certainly dressed the part of the effortless siren, but her experience with this sort of entanglement was observably lacking. It didn't make her any less appealing to him. If anything, her indecision of whether she should feel jealous of his history with Katya only made her more charming, somehow elevating her further above the primitive, physical world he inhabited. Katya, he knew, had experience with many entanglements of various types. The owner of Marivana cast a look between them, studying the situation with a new understanding. She appeared to be paying special attention to Vlad's face, and to the fact that he was decidedly not paying equal attention to her.
All drinks on me this evening,
she granted them generously as she backed away in retreat.
If you need anything else, you know how to be in touch, Vladimir.
Katya plucked his hand from the table in parting, threading her fingers between his and allowing them to slip away in tantalizing promise. She turned on her heel and left the two of them alone once more, her rear end working overtime to deliver her out of reach. Vlad didn't allow himself to look, and was surprised that his abstinence didn't even require that much effort.
"Who was that?"
Madison inquired when they were alone once more. She reached toward the sampler between them before clearly thinking better of it. She then allowed herself to overreach instead, lifting his untasted shot and acquiring it as her own. Vlad supposed it was the revenge she deserved. "The owner," he replied seamlessly, knowing full well that he withheld the information she ultimately wanted.
"What does she own?"
Madison asked offhand. She broke off from her questioning to tip back her second shot with equal ease to the first. Vlad smiled at the question in spite of himself. "Less than she thinks," he replied.
"You know, I've already given you a hard time for being Russian," Madison mentioned, thankfully segueing into another subject. "But you haven't remarked at all on my Irish ancestry. That takes a lot of self-control, let me assure you."
She lifted another glass from where it nested in the flight, letting it dangle casually between her fingers. In contrast to Katya, Madison's nails were real. Shorter, certainly, but he had no doubt that they could leave their mark on a man. Just imagining them clawing desperately along the bunched muscles of his back made him stiffen once more beneath the table.
"Usually dates think they're being really clever when they comment on my lineage," Madison continued. "I'm not used to waiting, so come on, I can take it."
"I have no doubt that you can take many things," Vlad returned as he finally helped himself to his first drink. Madison laughed, but her blush made it evident it was for show. She shifted in her chair, clearly at the mercy of whatever mental image his comment had inspired. Vlad would have given anything in that moment to know what she was thinking. He would have given more to make it a reality. Deciding to take pity on her, at least for now. "Let's just say I was referring to your business savvy," he volunteered. "Clearly you are as much a professional, used to getting what you want as I am. On the subject of lineage, I would like to know more about your family, your father specifically." But he couldn't say as much, not without betraying the note relegated to a secret pocket on the inside of his dinner jacket, nestled between his heart and the Makarov pistol he always carried on him. Madison shook her head, red curls bouncing around her beautiful face.
"You know enough already," she said. "We O'Connors may have what you call business savvy, but I sincerely doubt we have enough of it to last against a family like yours."
"You make the mistake of thinking we're at odds," Vlad observed, "despite what is obviously a mutually beneficial partnership. The O'Connor Fine Arts Gallery doesn't survive on the collective dreams of its artists and art benefactors, not even on the ambitions of a beautiful woman such as yourself." Madison gave a delighted little laugh at this.
"If you think I'm ambitious when it comes to the art we showcase, you're both right and wrong, Mr. Karev."
"Vlad," he insisted.
"Vlad,"
she repeated. Gazing into her eyes, he had an idea that the familiarity would stick this time.
"The fact remains, Vlad, that I'm not comfortable with your family's involvement in the... I'm not comfortable with your family's chosen business," she corrected herself quickly.
"You have nothing to fear from saying the words out loud, Madison. The patrons of Mari Vana are all too familiar with who I am and what I do for a living."
"That's probably true," Madison admitted, "but I still find it hard to discuss. Maybe if you told me a little more about yourself, about your family, I would start to feel a little more comfortable with all this."
She had just deflected his probe with an identical one of her own. Vlad helped himself to another shot before sitting back in his chair, fingering his lower lip, relishing the sting that lingered there. He considered her in silence. Beneath the heat of his gaze, Madison began to react to him once more. She dropped her thickly lashed eyes after a moment and preoccupied herself with straightening her utensils. Dinner was served to them without an official order being placed. Madison assessed the plate curiously as it was placed in front of her. An appetite looked good on her. It made Vlad wonder what other appetites she might be harboring. "Shashlik," he said, introducing the steaming dish, unleashing his Russian accent in a sensuous growl. Madison shifted in her chair again. leading him to believe that parts of her besides her ears were receptive to the foreignness of the language. Like a kebab.
I can see that.
They tucked into their meal, finishing the flight between breaks in conversation. Despite attempts on both sides of the table, nothing of further substance was revealed by the end of dinner. Not to say that Vlad didn't enjoy Madison O'Connor's company. In fact, he worried that he might have enjoyed it a little too much, as the conversation between them seemed both effortless and engaging. He thought it more than likely that his appraisal was shared, considering her closing proposal to him.
"Wanna see some art?"
Madison blurted out unexpectedly. If alcohol served to sharpen her tongue, then it blunted her other parts of speech. Vlad grinned expansively. "Da, I would love to." He watched her blush at the unexpected Russian resurgence. They rose together, and Vlad came around the table to walk her out. He let his hand fall to the small of her back, his fingers pressing themselves against the womanly indent they found as he guided her, and relished the little startled arch her spine gave at the intrusion as they walked out into the night together.
4. Madison. Madison didn't get art. She wasn't even sure she liked it most days. But if there was one thing she knew, it was that art sometimes inspired things in people, feelings, ideas, honesty. She had seen the gallery act as a confessional between couples on more than one occasion, especially late at night, and she didn't see why this evening should be any exception to the rule. Just because she had never been affected by the enchantment herself didn't mean it was beyond the realm of possibility. But no, that wasn't right. She was the enchantress tonight, and she couldn't allow herself to get swept up in the spell she hoped to cast. Just a little more flirting, a little more give and take, with a lot less give on her part, and Russian career criminal Vlad Karev would be as malleable as sculptor's clay in her hands. If the way he was looking at her back at the restaurant was any indication, she was almost there. "The new exhibit is all set up. We're unveiling it late next week," Madison explained as she fished her ring of keys from her purse to unlock the front of the building. Vlad stood off to the side at a polite distance, as if respecting the fact that he was an invited guest. It was a stark contrast to how he had conducted himself around the gallery earlier in the day. It was an even starker contrast to how he had conducted himself only minutes before, with his hand pressed against the dip of her back in an easy, undeniably deliberate signal to anyone who might be watching. She found herself missing the unexpected warmth of his touch, and wasn't sure she stood a chance of succeeding in her plan with the newly reserved man standing beside her. She should have known it was all a ruse. She unlocked the front door and pushed it open. To her surprise, Vlad slid past her and crossed the main room, turning through a doorway leading into one of the back hallways. Madison hastened after him to correct the error. "Vlad, there aren't any exhibits this way," she said as she caught up to him. "Only offices." The tall, immaculately dressed man at her side grinned wolfishly. "Oh, no, Madison said. She wished it didn't come out sounding so much like a plea. "Oh, yes," the Russian returned. "I came to see art, Miss O'Connor, and art is what I intend to see. That dress you're wearing looks good on you, but it's not the dress we agreed you would wear this evening." "First of all, thank you." The least she could do was express gratitude for the compliment, considering no man had ever spoken its equal to her before. "Second of all, get bent, Karev. I didn't agree to anything, and I'm definitely not some doll you get to play dress-up with. Just because you're used to getting your way—" "You're right," Vlad interrupted her, as if they were already in agreement and not at complete odds with one another. "I am." She might have stood a chance of having her own way if she had remembered to lock her office door that afternoon. She even paused to watch him go for the doorknob, a smug smile crossing her lips, before she saw it turn beneath his hand, and her feelings gave way to despair. She followed him inside, heart pounding in her chest, knowing exactly what they would find. The parcel that had arrived that afternoon was torn open on her desk.
Balls of tissue paper were scattered everywhere, and a midnight black garment that looked too short and too thin to be a dress draped across the back of her office chair, tag still in place.
Look,
She struggled for an excuse, trying not to panic as Vlad moved behind her desk and plucked up the dress.
If you want to see me in it so badly, why don't you ask me on another date?
She certainly hadn't meant to ask for another date so early into her mission, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Otherwise, she was bound to find herself stuck with measures leaving little to the imagination. This one isn't over yet. Vlad held the dress out to her, blue eyes flashing like silver scimitars in the low light of her desk lamp. She didn't have to take his orders. She didn't have to do anything she didn't want to do, especially in her own office. But as her gaze met his, she found herself taking the gift. Could it be a small part of her actually wanted Vlad to see her in the dress? It wasn't as if she looked terrible in it. On the contrary, she'd thought she looked borderline incredible when she tried it on earlier. But the look was so unlike what she was used to that she hastily stripped it off again. It was easy to think of herself as another woman inside that dress, a kept woman, a woman who too easily forgot to put family first and allowed herself to be swept away by charming Russian con men.
Are you at least going to leave the room? She pleaded.
I'll turn my back. Vlad arranged himself in the corner facing the wall. Madison's heart, which hadn't been behaving correctly since meeting him that morning, lodged in her throat. She could hear her pulse pounding in her ears. After reassuring herself that there was no possible way he could observe her from his chosen angle, Madison quickly shed the red dress, her pride and joy, although it had been part of her wardrobe since college if she was being honest, and started to wriggle herself into the costly, highly contested black dress. She knew from earlier in the day that trying it on with underwear was out of the question. It would never fit, and it would show lines besides. She dropped her panties and kicked them discreetly beneath her desk as she finished pulling it on. "Will you zip me up?" Her request was as muted as the whisper of the fabric against her skin. Vlad turned in the darkness and stepped into the warm glow of the lamp. Madison came around the side of her desk until there was no barrier left between them. Once she was within his easy reach, she stopped and turned to present her back to him. It felt like what she imagined turning her back on a predator in the wild might feel like. Stupid. And exciting. His hand lifted her hair aside. Then she felt the brush of his fingertips, the ice-cold metallic line of the zipper as it pressed firmly along her spine, the tight breathlessness that came as her torso was cinched up inside the bust. She rocked slightly, her eyes falling shut as she savored the feeling. Vlad swept her hair back into place, and she thought it was over. She moved to take a step away from him. One moment. He stooped down beside her, and Madison's traitorous heart rebounded around her newly constricted rib cage. She could feel her core heat as he drew level with the curve of her ass. What was he doing? Did he suspect she had already stripped off her underwear for him? Was he about to find out? The Russian pressed his face close to the seam running over the swell of her hip. Madison thought she would hit the ceiling. She thought a lot of things were about to happen to her in that moment. But what Vlad actually did was the least expected of all. His hands came up to grasp her thighs through the dress, and he clenched his teeth. He yanked his head to the side. The dress's tag came off in his teeth. He stood and extracted it from his mouth. Madison was certain her face must have been as red as her lipstick. "Give me that. You could have used scissors." She turned, about to toss the tag in the trash before thinking better of it. She laid it on her desk. "So you can return it later." "I won't be returning it. It's yours." They stared at each other for a long moment in the low light. Madison had always thought her office was small, but now it was positively claustrophobic. She cleared her throat, and Vlad smiled politely. "You were going to give me a tour," he reminded her. "Show me the new exhibit, I believe."
Oh, right. Art. I want to show you the O'Connor Fine Arts Gallery is more than just a cover for the mob's money laundering scheme, she explained as she led them both out of her office. It's an important public fixture. It benefits everyone, not just my family or yours. It's more than another way to get around the feds. As they walked together, he said nothing about how she looked in the dress. She wondered if this was a good thing or a bad thing. Just when she thought she had pinned the man down, he acted in a way she didn't expect. It made her nervous. More than that, it left her craving more. I didn't think you liked your job at the gallery, Vlad noted as they entered the main hall. As she led the way into the west room, Madison pulled a face. I like my job fine. It's just that I still have a lot to learn about art and art appreciation, she confessed as they halted before a display. I'm the first to admit it. Hell, I even went to school for it, pursued my master's in art history. My father hired me not only because he knew I was the most qualified to run the family business, but because he thought I could continue my education here. I defer to your expertise then. Vlad laced his tattooed hands behind his back and studied the far wall. What do you think of this one? In truth, Madison hadn't been thinking much outside of wondering what else Vlad could do with his teeth. The monologue she had been rattling off to him was a version of the one she usually told when she was forced to give tours to investors, give or take a few of the more personal details. No one except Savannah knew about her struggle with art appreciation. No one until Vlad. And she refused to belabor the fact that she had so willingly shared that little bit of information about herself. The latest installation drew her attention away from him. It was a colorful piece, bold with indefinite lines between swatches of flesh-toned hues. Anyone, even Madison, could see after a moment's consideration that it was meant to invoke a couple having sex. A shiver coursed through her that had nothing to do with how revealing the little black dress was. If anything, it was starting to feel a little too warm in here. I think that I might have to keep the sheet over that one until the later tours, she muttered as they continued on. The other pieces weren't much better. If anything, they were more explicit. Not that Madison didn't find their eroticism strangely beautiful, but she couldn't help but wonder what her father had been thinking when he agreed to exhibit this artist's work. Surely the audience for this was limited. Then again, maybe they were inviting a whole new audience in, inspiring new feelings. Did her eyes deceive her, or was one of the figures wearing a black dress, her abstract breasts bared above a burst strap? The ecstatic look on the painted woman's face as she gave herself over to her dark, destructive lover was... Madison felt the ghost of something. A hand. Vlad stood so close to her that his shoulder brushed against hers. How had she not noticed him right beside her before? She wrestled with her own thoughts, desperate to continue the tour, as the hand moved up her thigh, bringing the skirt of her dress with it. And that one is... I'm tired of only viewing, Vlad murmured into her temple. His fingers neared the cleft of her ass, and Madison shuddered. Cameras. She didn't know why it was the word she chose, but it seemed to perfectly encompass the sudden danger in their situation. There's a blind spot in your security system, Vlad said. Here. How do you know that? Madison gasped as he backed her behind a nearby pillar. You shouldn't know that. There are a lot of things I shouldn't know, Vlad whispered heatedly into her neck. Like the fact that you were wearing underwear earlier this evening, and now you are not. He tugged the material of the dress up as savagely as the man in the painting, baring her rear in the dark. Madison gasped again. This was spiraling. They were spiraling.
Sorry, readers. Here's where we fade to black due to YouTube explicit content guidelines. If you dream for the steam, you'll need to take a look in the book.
Madison yanked the back of her dress down before turning to face her adversary. Vlad's glacial gaze found her in the darkness.
studying her. She knew she didn't need to study the situation below his belt to know exactly how much he had been enjoying their unexpected rendezvous. But then again, maybe she did want to know, or more importantly, how it would feel without all the excess clothing they seemed to be wearing. Oh, to hell with it. Madison threw caution to the wind and reached out to him, recapturing the rogue hand, her thumb gliding its way along the tattoo as she tugged him closer. Vlad came without resistance. Clearly he wasn't used to being refused by women, but it was equally evident that he wouldn't readily give up all plans of tangling with her if she invited him back. "Let's get out of here," she murmured. "Please." She moved her cherry-red lips to form the plea scant inches from his own mouth. Vlad groaned. It was encouraging, at least, that he could seem to articulate an answer one way or the other. His free hand, the one she didn't hold in her own, came up to cup the curve of her backside and usher them both out from behind the column. Madison felt a flood of warmth at the ready return of his touch. Savannah was going to kill her. Madison wondered if she had the ability to keep something like this from her friend. The FBI agent could almost immediately detect when she was being lied to. Madison wasn't sure whether she preferred being branded a liar to being branded something else entirely. But damn it, she had a job to do, and if that meant getting into bed with the inked Adonis and submitting herself to his talented roving hands once more, there were far worse things that she could be doing. And, truth be told, she could think of nothing she'd rather do. "I live a few blocks from the gallery, down on 3rd. She should not have said that. Seducing Vlad and getting the information she required didn't mean filling out an application form. It was better that her mark didn't know where she lived, right? "But I've been looking for a place a bit closer," she continued as she pressed herself against his chest. "Maybe your place is a bit closer?" "I would have you in your office," Vlad murmured. The thought thrilled Madison, but she shook her head. The whole point of this was to get closer to Vlad and Vlad's world, right? This had nothing to do with her sudden, inexplicable desire to be lying beneath him on her back, supported by protesting bedsprings. Did it? "But I'm guessing you would still prefer we pick this up somewhere else." "Yes, please," Madison agreed before she could too vividly imagine otherwise. She fished for her keys as they strolled quickly for the front doors, appearing for all the world, and for the cameras, like two art viewers who had taken in all they could for one evening. Thankfully, the security footage did not show just how eager Madison O'Connor was to continue taking in new things. As they exited the gallery together, they were met with a sobering surprise. A man sat on the wide stone steps out front. A man who appeared to be waiting, although she couldn't imagine for whom. She hadn't told anyone but Savannah where she intended to be tonight. "Peter?" She recognized the man as he rose fluidly and didn't mask her surprise at seeing him. Vlad froze in place beside her as she detached without realizing and glided forward to meet the gallery's surprise visitor. Peter Franklin had been an associate and good friend of her father's for years. She had always thought him tall and in well-kept shape physically, but next to Vlad, she could see just how unremarkable Peter really was, and this was with him standing a few steps higher than Vlad. It surprised her that the Russian, who had found ways of keeping close to her all evening, now appeared to be hanging back and maintaining his distance from them. "Maddie, I'm sorry." Peter Franklin forked a finger and pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "Looks like I didn't mean to interrupt anything." "Maddie?" Vlad observed the familiarity. His voice was as stiff as his posture. Madison darted him a look, wanting to be angry with his rudeness, but unclear as to where it was coming from. Finally, terribly, it clicked. "Wait, do the two of you know each other?" Madison demanded. An awkward silence descended between the three of them. She supposed that answered her question. Her skin prickled, and she knew her already overworked complexion darkened in a hue indicative of her displeasure. Funny how the human body, or at least her body, could find every opportunity to flush and make her feelings known. "I see," she said eventually. "You've worked together in the past. Maybe you even work together now." "Purely a business arrangement," Peter interjected. "How do the two of you know each other?" Vlad demanded. The heat behind his own version of the question startled Madison. It was almost as if but no, it couldn't be. There was no way Vlad Karev perceived a threat in Peter Franklin. What's more, there was no way he could actually be jealous of Madison's history with the other man. Could he? Her friendship with Peter was entirely innocent. She couldn't decide if having it misconstrued now as anything otherwise would work in her favor, or only succeed in driving an unforeseen wedge between herself and Vlad. "Peter has advised my father on more than one occasion," Madison said carefully. "Our family has always found his legal input invaluable, but I can see now where we might have made a mistake. Maddie, I promise I'll explain everything to you when I can." Unbelievably, Peter grasped her by her shoulders. Clearly, he wasn't reading Vlad's body language the way she was. Clearly, he couldn't see the way the Russian tensed like an apex predator watching his conquest get stolen out from underneath him by a scavenger. "But right now, I need you to answer something for me. Just a quick answer and I'll be out of your hair. The both of you," he amended with an apologetic, faintly oblivious glance at Vlad. "Go on," Vlad instructed. "Ask her." His challenge was a clear assertion of Vlad's authority over Peter Franklin. He was effectively forcing the lawyer who worked under him to conduct his business with a third party present. Before she could turn and request the privacy she thought due to her, Peter said, "Maddie, when was the last time you saw Sergei?" Now, that was unexpected. She completed her turn toward Vlad, who bore a stricken look in the immediate aftermath of the question. She thought his expression must mirror her own. "About a month ago, I left Sergei a note," she said, her eyebrows pulling together. "From my father, but you knew that already, Peter." "Where is that note now?" Peter prompted her. Was it her imagination, or was the tension in Vlad's body bordering on petrification? He looked like a statue that had escaped the gallery standing there. "I have no idea," she replied. "And frankly, I'm surprised you would come all the way out here to ask me that, at this hour." She rested her hands on her hips and directed her most pointed gaze toward the lawyer. "Especially considering I told precisely no one where I would be." That wasn't exactly true, but Savannah didn't know Peter and certainly wouldn't have ratted Madison's whereabouts out to him. "It's nothing," Peter dismissed quickly. "I had a feeling you'd be here, that's all." But nothing about your feeling indicated that I would be here with Vlad. She had always been tight with Peter, but she wasn't sure that their close working relationship would continue now that she knew he was on the Bratva's bankroll. Then again, so was she. "Vlad, have you seen Maxim around recently?" Peter asked, switching over to addressing the silent Russian. "Maxim? Who is Maxim? Another member of the mob?" With a name like that, he had to be, she decided. She filed the information away for later. "Not since the funeral," Vlad answered him. Peter nodded, wearing an odd expression that Madison couldn't quite place. There was a lot about this surprise meeting that she couldn't quite place. Peter Franklin waved as he departed, hustling back down the stairs and popping the collar of his coat against the night. Vlad's expression was easier to read now. His eyes were slotted, narrowed in a glare powered by an anger Madison hadn't expected to see, especially not directed toward someone who secretly worked for his family. "Vlad?" she asked hesitantly. "What is it?" He didn't answer her. Madison raised an anxious hand to the side of her hair and pressed it flat. Her curls were already starting to fall out. "When I mentioned I delivered a note to your father," she started. "I'll call you a cab," Vlad interrupted her. Her heart lodged in her throat. She tried to search his expression for some tell, some indication of what she had done wrong or why the night had gone sour so quickly. All she could think
was that her downfall had begun with Peter's arrival. But what had she said to warrant this reaction? Vlad moved down the steps to signal for a cab. Madison hurried after him. "You know, I'm perfectly capable of finding my own way home." She was at a loss of how to recapture what they had, where they had found themselves only minutes before. She could still feel the hot, possessive imprint of Vlad's hand burning between her legs. More infuriatingly, she found herself still aching for the touch. If only she hadn't halted things inside the gallery. Maybe they would. "You said you didn't live close." Vlad's voice was chilly, so cold that it momentarily froze Madison to the spot. So that was how it was. He was calling an end to their night together just like that. Well, she wasn't about to give him any more reason to believe she might be devastated by the lack of an outcome. Madison whirled on her heel and walked away from him, hiking the strap of her purse up over her bare shoulder. Behind her, she heard Vlad's sigh of exasperation and the brisk staccato of his footsteps as he followed after her. She cursed privately and hopped up onto one foot to divest the other of its heel. Soon enough, she was barefoot and gaining speed, but Vlad caught up to her anyway. He didn't speak a word to call her back or put out a hand on her arm to stop her. Instead, Madison felt a surprising weight settle on her neck and shoulders. Vlad's dinner jacket, still warm from his body heat. She paused. Then, without saying a word, she kept walking. 5. Vlad. Just like that, the enchantment of the evening was over, and Madison, his Cinderella in a midnight black dress, escaped into the night. She had looked every bit as stunning as he had imagined. Vlad drove home alone. Maybe that had been his expectation earlier in the evening, but as the date progressed, he thought it less and less likely that he would be able to separate himself from her when the time came. Their heated moment in the shadows behind the column had solidified his opinion of where the fiery woman belonged, beneath him, beholden to him and the pleasure he alone could bring her. He could see now how impossible his wish was. Madison O'Connor had submitted herself to him only once, and he doubted she would ever let herself get into a similar situation with him again. What's more, he shouldn't want to find himself further entangled with the woman. She was a dangerous distraction from his investigation, especially now, considering that she had outright admitted to being the one who had delivered the note to his father on the night of his murder. She was as much a suspect as anyone as far as he was concerned. But there was something about the enigmatic redhead that had him thinking of much more carnal pleasures than delving for information about his father. He knew that her reason for accepting his dinner reservation was a thinly veiled attempt to sway him toward releasing her family and gallery from under his thumb, but neither could deny their attraction. What had started as a mutual attempt to secure information from each other had quickly spiraled into something much more stimulating. Less than 10 minutes later, he was turning the key to unlock his apartment. He pushed the door open slowly, surveying his domain with minimal interest. He wasn't a poor man, none of the Karev brothers were, but he lived sparingly, deliberately. He supposed he lacked imagination, or at least that his brother Dmitri must not have been far off in accusing him of such a deficiency. The apartment was one of the larger one-bedrooms in the building. Vlad kept no pets and no plants. The paneled wood floor boasted no rugs, ornate or otherwise. He did not have a TV. There were dishes piled in the kitchen sink, but they hadn't been there for more than 24 hours and were certain to be dealt with immediately now that he had arrived home. If he didn't command a cozy environment, then at least it was an easily managed one, a controlled one. He owned a couch and an armchair, and in the armchair sat someone who had decidedly not been there when Vlad left that evening for his date with Madison. Vlad felt no fear at the discovery, only a flood of coldness. Even stranded in the darkness of the apartment, the shape of the figure's slumped shoulders wasn't unfamiliar to him. He reached out and flipped on the light. Maxim Karev sat in the chair,
pouring himself a glass from the bottle Vlad normally kept perched atop his fridge. He had been planning to help himself to it before starting the dishes. Vlad tossed his keys down onto the barren table in the entryway and crossed his immense arms in disapproval.
"Looks like you're missing something," his eldest brother remarked, never lifting his eyes from the fast-thinning stream of alcohol splashing across the ice in his glass. He had let his dark beard grow in, Vlad noted. It added to the impenetrable nature of the shadows cast around his brother's expression.
"Yeah, my vodka." Vlad nodded pointedly with a single jerking movement of his head as Maxim finished emptying the bottle.
His brother set it aside on the stand beside the armchair and sat back, rolling the glass in his hand. "What happened to your dinner jacket?" he prompted.
Dinner ended. Vlad moved into the open kitchen. He didn't feel like engaging with his brother, not tonight. They both knew exactly where the conversation would go, and what terrible words risked being exchanged. This didn't appear to deter Maxim. Then again, Vlad wasn't sure much could deter his brother at this point. Not only had he let himself into the apartment when Vlad had been certain to never give him anything resembling a copy of the apartment key, but Maxim must have been drinking for the better part of an hour to have already succeeded in finishing a half-empty bottle on his own.
"Was it nice?" Maxim asked.
"Why are you here?" Vlad pushed up his sleeves and started in on the dishes. He watched for a moment as the water splashed over his wrists, darkening the tattoos on his arms. He kept his hands from clenching into fists through a conscious exercise of will. He had already come to blows with one brother today. Better not to lose his temper now. Even if his aborted date and mounting suspicion about Madison made him want to punch a hole into something pliant. Another human being, especially one as annoying as Maxim, seemed like the optimal target.
"Dmitri said you stopped by today,"
Maxim said, which didn't strike Vlad as an especially illuminating answer.
"He seemed worried about you."
"I can take care of it." Did he dare qualify what he meant? Or did he let Maxim keep guessing? He hadn't been home for more than 5 minutes, and they were trespassing into dangerous territory already. "I don't need you coming around to breathe down my neck about the family business when you've made it very fucking clear you want no part in it. You can take whatever insight you think you have on how I'm running things and shove it up your jopa."
"Is that what you think I'm here for?"
Maxim laughed, and Vlad's blood boiled at the mocking tone in his voice. Maybe it was the liquor making the bitter humor come so readily to his brother now.
"To criticize you?"
"Every Karev has an opinion," Vlad snapped, "but only one of them is running the show. I don't need advice on how to operate, either personally or professionally, from someone who tucked tail and ran from his responsibilities." Maxim sat up straighter in his chair, shifting forward on the cushion until he looked about to fall forward or spring up. His leg jogged, and the lamplight reflecting off the gloss of his expensive dress shoe. He still dressed like the head of security for the mob, even though it had been 2 years since he had officially relinquished the title. Looking at him now and feeling like he was seeing the old Maxim made Vlad despise him more. His brother had cut himself adrift, so why didn't he own it? Why didn't he pursue whatever insipid, promiscuous life he wanted and quit sniffing around Vlad's own?
"Hey, I didn't come here looking for a fight. But don't think I have any reservations in beating your ass, Vlad," Maxim warned. "I'll give you a scar over your other eyebrow to match the one I left you with last time."
The threat was real, but Vlad doubted it would go down quite the same way tonight if they did wind up resorting to violence. Maxim was obviously drunk and seemed less in possession of himself in recent days. Where he might have once dominated Vlad in the boxing ring, Vlad doubted he could so much as tear open a crate of boxed wine at the moment without a soberer pair of hands to assist him. Maxim sighed and settled back in the chair once more. He looked exhausted. It startled Vlad to see details of his own reflection in the wake of their father's death evidenced in Maxim's face.
"No, I'm sorry. That wasn't what I came here to say. Not at all.
Jesus, this is starting to feel like the last time I saw Father. He reached up to pinch the straight bridge of his nose with so much force that Vlad thought he would bend it. Then Maxim gave his head a shake as if to clear it. Vlad felt a sudden chill spreading up his back between his shoulder blades. He leaned back against the sink, large hands wrapping around the lip of the counter to hold him up, or to hold him back. "What do you mean?" he asked eventually. "When was the last time you saw him?" "You mean besides at the old man's funeral?" Maxim smiled bitterly. "I saw him the day before Peter found him lying face down on the floor of his office in a pool of his own proud blood. Hell, I was in that office with him not even 24 hours before, getting chewed out and disowned all over again for simply trying to talk to him." "You saw him?" "Before Sergei Karev died, Maxim saw him, fought with him." The revelation left him with a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach he couldn't seem to shake. No matter how much he tried to convince himself that it was Maxim he was now factoring into the scenario of Sergei's death. "Were you as drunk as you are now?" Vlad demanded. "Did you make these sort of threats against him? Similar threats?" "You son of a bitch!" Maxim catapulted out of the chair, and Vlad was already halfway across the kitchen ready to meet him. Maxim's response was immediate, volatile, and in Vlad's private estimation, completely out of proportion to his questions. Then again, maybe Maxim wasn't as fucked up in his current state as Vlad presumed. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. Don't try to make me into what you... I know what you're trying to do." Maxim thrust out with the glass of vodka, and Vlad snatched it from him. He wasn't eager to see his only glass broken, let alone potentially used against him as a weapon. "I know what you're trying to do," Maxim breathed out shakily. "What you're trying to think. I can't believe you'd even consider it. But here we are. And here I go." He started for the door. "I'm leaving. I should never have come here. I thought I could talk to you about Father and about how we ended things. We never thought that would be the last time we saw each other. I didn't expect him to die. I didn't want him to die." "Neither did Sergei," Vlad said. The two brothers glared at one another. Vlad noticed the fevered sheen in Maxim's eyes and wondered if it came from being intoxicated or something more. If he was drunk and emotional enough to threaten violence against his brother, whose apartment he had forced his way into, what else might he be capable of? Maxim rarely allowed Vlad or anyone else to have the last word, but tonight appeared to be a night for revelations. Vlad watched as his brother turned away once more and departed without a word, catching himself slightly in the doorframe on his way out. The green numbers on his microwave blinked ominously, signaling that it was well and officially midnight. It was the 1-month anniversary of their father's murder. Vlad had errands to run the next morning. He needed to have the locks on his apartment changed. He also needed to swing by the O'Connor Fine Arts Gallery and deal with developments there. It might require seeing Madison again. This time, Vlad Karev wouldn't be incognito when he dropped by. He dressed that morning for battle, donning his best and blackest suit like armor, tightening his cuffs like protective gauntlets. He ran a fine-toothed comb through his blonde hair until it laid flat back against his skull, as perfectly tamed as his severe, considering expression. No matter how bad his brother had looked last night, and no matter the renewed suspicions Maxim's erratic behavior had inspired in Vlad, he wasn't ready to give up Madison as a potential suspect just yet. The woman had revealed herself to be the one responsible for delivering the note to his father and setting up a meeting between the patriarchs. If Carson O'Connor was in any way involved with the events leading up to Sergei's death, then Madison herself had acted as an accomplice, unwitting or not. And Vlad knew there were very few things unwitting about the woman who operated the art gallery. If she was capable of making him forget, even for a moment, about his investigation, then it was also possible she was playing him. He might have had his hands on his own father's murderous last night. A part of him doubted the veracity of his thoughts, as his fingers twitched in anticipation of running them along her silken skin again. Clearing his mind of his erotic thoughts, he reminded himself that he had a job to do. So when he put in the order for a lock and a key change, he also had another set of keys made for himself. He placed a call. Then he drove down to the gallery and let himself in through the front doors. "Vlad!" a hearty voice called over to him a half-hour later. Vlad stood before the mural that had been the inspiration for his passion the night before, trying not to see himself in it. The voice was a welcome interruption. He had a feeling he had been standing in a state of consideration longer than was good for his rough image. "Over here," he said. He tucked an unlit cigarette behind his ear as Lucas Safin joined him. The other was lugging a duffel bag loaded to the seams with tangled electrical cords and rattling equipment. He dropped the bag between them and held his arms out to Vlad. "Good to see you. How you doing, buddy?" Vlad's mouth twitched in a smile, and he took Lucas up on the offered embrace. They cemented their bodies together briefly in brotherhood, and Lucas clapped him on the back. He didn't even hug his own family outside of funerals, but Lucas was his best and maybe his only friend, and Vlad trusted him with his life. The pool of people he could confidently say that about was fast dwindling. "Glad you called," Lucas said as he drew back. "I just need a signature for the paperwork, and then we can get started with the installation." Vlad appreciated the show Lucas was putting on. Most of the paperwork that circulated between them during jobs was for posterity's sake. All it required was a quick scribble from him, and they could get down to the real business at hand. He handed the clipboard back to Lucas. The latter grinned, before his expression caved all at once at something over Vlad's shoulder. The Russian felt his pulse still, and he was overcome by a strange inner quietude, the calm before the storm. He knew before he turned around to see what Lucas saw walking toward them. Madison O'Connor strode into the room, her fiery red hair knotted up from the graceful, controlled line of her neck and pinned back from her furious face. So, she had come dressed for battle as well. Without thinking, Vlad reached into his pocket to touch the folded note that had been the start of all this. He was shocked to find it gone. "Excuse me, gentlemen, but just what the hell is going on here?" Madison demanded. Lucas darted a look between them, clearly trying to get a bead on the situation. "I am about to open for the day, and I would like to know who let you in here, and what the hell you think it is you're doing." Vlad noticed her gaze, though furious, didn't linger on him for long. He wondered if even in her fury at the intrusion, Madison O'Connor was having as hard a time forgetting where his hands had been the night before as he was. He decided to use it to his possible advantage now. "I'm addressing a blind spot in your security system," Vlad said. "Did you forget already? We tested it out at great length last night." "I wouldn't say we spent a lot of time discussing it, Mr. Karev. And I certainly wouldn't call the length in question great." Madison's cheeks colored, the constellation of her freckles darkening by degrees. Lucas's glances between them were becoming almost comically frequent as he tried to read the subtext of the confrontation. Vlad didn't care if he succeeded or not. All he cared about right now was winning against Madison. But she wouldn't be easily deterred. Her dark brown eyes snapped away from his to focus on the duffel bag. She kicked it with the side of her heel, gauging its weight. Lucas winced at the indelicate treatment of his equipment from such a delicate-looking woman. Remembering her comments about the lengths of things, Vlad thought a small part of him could sympathize. "I'm not authorizing this, any of this," Madison stated. "And I don't require your authorization in the matter," Vlad returned immediately. "It's only right that I should be justified in taking the initiative to protect my family's investment. In fact, I'd say it's a generous gesture, considering I'm paying out of my own pocket to cover flaws in the security system set up by your family." "Flaws?"
Plural? Is it just one blind spot you're looking into? Madison kicked the duffel bag again, much more savagely this time, and Lucas groaned at the maltreatment. Then why am I looking at multiple pieces of hardware here? You're not intending to set these up around the gallery and double down on footage, are you? Who is this? She trained her dark eyes on Lucas suddenly, startling the security technician. Lucas pulled his baseball cap off and turned it over nervously in his hands. Vlad felt a thrill of frustration looking at the other man. He needed an ally against Madison O'Connor, not a man whose professionalism fissured under pressure from a beautiful woman.
Lucas Safin, Lucas said. I've worked closely with Vlad's family for years. Sorry, I thought we were all set here.
And just where do these cameras feed to, Mr. Safin? Madison asked. Because I certainly don't see enough cord here to rig them up to the main system, much less assimilate the newer feeds with the old. Were you intending to install and operate these wirelessly? And just whose wireless were you?
I'll take care of this, Vlad interrupted. He shot a hand out to grab Madison by her bicep. She scoffed in protest, realizing she was the this in question, but couldn't find the words in time to rescue herself from being steered away from Lucas. For his part, Lucas looked relieved to be getting back to his work. Vlad's signature was enough for him to feel comfortable getting started. He bent to his bag, whistling, as Madison struggled to escape Vlad. He tightened the pressure on her arm in warning. They went behind the column. Maybe you'll feel more comfortable discussing the details of our business partnership, he began to say.
Take off your sunglasses,
Madison interrupted. The order surprised Vlad. It was certainly one of the last things he had expected her to say now that they were alone together. Why would I do that?
Because I want to see what you're really up to.
Madison canted her hip, resting her diminutive fist on the indent of her waist. Her posture immediately evoked ideas of all the things Vlad would be able to do with her if his hands replaced her own.
I want to see your eyes. And before you accuse me of being insipid, just remember that only one of us thinks he actually looks cool wearing them indoors.
You think I look cool? You don't need to admit it out loud to me. He complied all the same, removing the black matte lenses and tucking them inside his suit collar. He tried to mask an appreciative look now that he could see her in full, vivid color before him. Less than 24 hours, and he had already forgotten how truly stunning she was to behold.
Just how many of my employees and contractors are working for you? Madison asked.
It might have begun in her head as a rhetorical question, but she sounded desperate for an answer. Vlad knew what that desperation was like. It was waking up one morning to find everyone you thought you trusted lacked an alibi. It was discovering that even those closest to you weren't who they seemed. The man you call Peter Franklin, I know as Peter Fehoshev, Vlad said eventually. Madison crossed her arms, but this time she didn't interrupt him. He's our organization's legal contact and lawyer, and a trusted member of the Bratva in his own right. He's the man who first found my father's body and called the police. It was a fact of the case. He revealed nothing important in his investigation by telling her as much. If Madison O'Connor was at all involved in the circumstances surrounding Sergei's death, she would have kept herself apprised of its developments from the beginning. Of course, there remained the question of how far Peter's own involvement extended. Before the unexpected meeting with Maxim last night, Peter would have ranked very high up on Vlad's list of suspects. Now, he wasn't even sure the list had a hierarchy or a proper end to it.
How did your father die exactly?
Madison wasn't pulling any punches today. She did look slightly sorry for the tone of her question, though. Her full lips drew together as she considered her next words.
I mean, I know he was murdered, but...
My father died brutally, Vlad stated. The back of his skull was staved in by an ice pick, the same one they found plunged into his chest and speared through his heart. There was blood everywhere, and other evidence of an intense struggle, broken furniture, an upset bookshelf. In the end, my father was no match for the individual who attacked him. I believe he knew his assailant. He watched Madison very carefully as he spoke. The look of horror that dawned across her expression as he described the scene seemed real enough. The hand that covered her mouth, seemingly unconsciously, was a nice touch.
"Oh, God," she said.
If there is a God, he wasn't in the room with Sergei that day, Vlad stated. It was something he had thought often, but never said out loud. He had certainly never expected to bear such a personal musing to Madison O'Connor. Her hand came away from her mouth, and he watched her unhappy frown twist in sympathy. That he could use to his advantage now, too, even if it wasn't his preferred approach. Whether she was faking it or not, she couldn't back off now that he had bared a sliver of his soul to her. "Let me make this installation," Vlad pressed. "If not for the safety of both our investments, then for your own safety. Many people saw us together last night. If there is someone picking off Karevs, then their mercilessness might easily extend to those closest to them."
"Close?"
Madison repeated incredulously. Then she snorted. Vlad tried not to feel nettled by her disbelief. If there was one thing he knew, it was that people could appear one way while being very different behind locked doors or screening columns. Whatever Madison thought of their relationship, whatever he thought, it meant little to the outside observer. If someone harboring a malicious will toward his family had seen them together last night, he could only guess at what they might have thought. Admittedly, whatever they thought was nothing compared to his active imagination, which has been in constant overdrive since meeting the delectable redhead.
"Fine, whatever."
Madison turned away from him. Lucas straightened from the cords he was untangling and smiled at her. Vlad thought he looked ridiculous, but said nothing. The encounter with Peter last night had been a rude awakening to his own capacities for jealousy.
"It's obvious you're only doing this to spy on me," Madison continued. "I better not find one of these in my office. If you wanted a second date, you could have just asked."
Vlad felt his lips twist in a smile of amusement at her claim. "And what would your answer be if I did?" he asked.
"Hell no." Madison raised her pale wrist to check her watch. "I'm here long enough to open the gallery, and then I'm off. I've got personal stuff to deal with today. Peter will be coming around to check up on things later. He has a meeting with my mother. She hasn't been well since my father made such an ill-advised decision to jump into bed with Sergei, and I don't want her to be under any more stress than she already is. She still has no idea what an unrepentant traitor he is, and I intend to keep it that way for now."
"I'll be sure to keep any revelations between us," Vlad said. "I have a renewed respect for the fragility of mothers."
"Don't go anywhere near my mother, Vlad. I mean it. She hasn't been feeling well," Madison advised.
Then she was gone, striding from the room with an agility Vlad found unbelievable considering the height of her heels. Her ass looked just as good, if not better, than it had yesterday. He remembered all too well how it had felt beneath his hand. "So," Lucas threw a freshly untangled cord out in front of him. "You hit that because I was thinking." "I'm not paying you to think," Vlad growled. His territorial instinct once more reared its ugly head, but this time he decided to embrace it. However he decided to deal with Madison O'Connor, he was going to be the one to bring the fiery woman to her knees, either in confession or in complete submission to the overwhelming attraction that they both so obviously felt. He left Lucas to his equipment and stepped outside for a smoke. He had no doubt that Madison had retreated to her office and would leave out the back when she was ready. He thumbed his lighter and cupped his hand around his mouth before expelling a long sigh, as if he had been holding all that smoke for the entirety of their encounter. Some of the tension eased out of his shoulders, but it was inevitable they would begin to edge back up as soon as his thoughts turned toward the missing evidence. Maxim. He must have stolen the note somehow when Vlad wasn't looking. Had the drunkenness with the broken and repentant confession all been for show? Had his own brother played him like a Stradivarius violin? What he wouldn't give for another meeting with his dear sibling. It was almost enough to make him wish he hadn't been so quick to change the locks.
6. Madison. "Careful with that," Madison exclaimed. "Sorry, Miss O'Connor." The mover, a kid who couldn't have been long out of high school, reached up to tip his baseball cap, which caused him to relinquish his grasp on the box. Madison dove forward as it leaned, catching it before it slipped and fell to the floor of the apartment hallway. "Careful!" She tried to keep her voice level, at the very least below a shout, but it was proving as difficult for her as not dropping anything was proving for her movers. This is what came of trying out new services. If she thought the old company was bad when it came to handling gallery purchases gently, then this lot was even worse when it came to handling her personal property. At least she could console herself in the fact that she didn't own anything especially nice, and if she did, she was certain to find it in pieces by the end of the day. The men didn't appear to be listening to her. 2 of them loitered by the entryway to the stairs, their arms crossed and decidedly not filled with boxed items. A third stepped out of the nearby elevator and nearly dropped the chair he was carrying when he noticed something fall out of his left pocket. The 2 by the stairs erupted into rough gales of laughter when everyone watching in the hallway realized it was a joint. Madison's face burned. Just what was she paying these people for? The move into her apartment was going to take all day unless—
"Get the hell out of my way," a low, measured voice warned from the stairwell. "And get that van unloaded in the parking lot in the next hour."
"What?" one of the loiterers questioned as he turned. "Who the hell do you think you—" Unfortunately, Madison already knew the answer to that question. She watched as the 2 men sprang away from the tall, ominous figure filling the entryway, surprised that they didn't yelp their terror like 2 frightened dogs dismayed to discover their master had just come home. Vlad stepped from the landing into the hallway, seemingly nonplussed by their reaction and unwilling to repeat his order. His bright blue gaze flashed down the hallway as he looked for more obstructions, finally alighting on Madison herself. Her stomach gave a startled twist as their eyes locked. She might as well have been riding a roller coaster that just dropped out from underneath her. It wasn't an unexpected feeling, nor was it unpleasant. The man had been on her mind since the moment they met, and not for the reasons she would prefer. Instead of contemplating ways to get him out of her life, she was imagining ways to draw him closer.
"Madison?"
The cold edge to Vlad's voice warmed with his recognition of her, although he didn't sound any less confused. The cluster of gawking movers quickly amassed themselves back in the elevator and disappeared behind the closing doors. Somehow, Madison felt more confident now that her belongings would be unloaded in a timely fashion. Unfortunately, it had once again taken the particular charisma of a blonde-haired mobster to motivate the men at her disposal. "Today's my move-in day. I had to reserve the elevator." She had no idea why she was babbling about the elevator to the tall, too familiar man standing before her. "Vlad, you live here?"
"I live in that unit."
He nodded to the door directly beside hers. He was dressed casually again today in a plain V-neck and jeans, and he carried a bag of groceries in his arms. Madison could plainly see the full sleeves of his tattoos now, and the fact that the midnight black ink seemed to cover more muscle than his pale flesh did. What would those arms look like wrapped around her, contrasted with the milk-white plain of her naked stomach, her breasts? "No way," she said, shaking her head once to clear it of the invading image. Her suspicions about the work he commissioned at the gallery came crashing back now with a vengeance. "Are you surveilling me?" she demanded. Vlad's eyes dropped from her face to rake her figure. Her question may as well have been a self-fulfilling prophecy, Madison realized too late. She folded her arms across her chest, trying to obstruct his view, but knew it was a lost cause. He seemed like he could see right through her clothes.
"I might ask you the same," Vlad said, "considering I was the one living here first."
"I knew it," Madison muttered to herself. "I knew I shouldn't have moved into this building sight unseen with only a blueprint to guide my decorating decisions. All right, let the seeing commence." She moved away from him and reached for the handle to his apartment.
"Inviting yourself over already?" Vlad sounded amused. The door didn't give beneath her hand as she had half expected. She heard the rattle of a ring of keys and stepped back as Vlad unlocked his apartment for her perusal.
If you really live next door to me, then your apartment is as small as mine, she deduced. I need ideas on what to do with the space.
She didn't know what she expected. She supposed her number one assumption was that a son of the mob would not be living in such a low-cost building. Maybe a part of her still thought Vlad was putting her on for his own amusement, but the fact that his key turned effortlessly in the lock proved her wrong. If he really did live next door, then surely his apartment would be furnished lavishly, expensively, hybridized by technology and rare antiques bought and paid for by a resume of crimes Madison couldn't even begin to quantify. Maybe she expected to find a dark room, a jungle of wires, a tree of glowing computer screens displaying various rooms in her family's art gallery. Maybe she expected a table of half-assembled illegal arms and an open briefcase full of money. She didn't expect to find Vlad's apartment so empty.
You can't live here. Clearly, you can afford better, Madison muttered as she gazed at the solitary armchair in the rugless room.
She took in the lopsided window curtains, the single water stain on the side table, the empty bottles of vodka littered around the lonely chair.
Can anyone?
You know, you're at your most insulting when you aren't trying to insult me at all, Vlad observed. He deposited the bag of groceries on the kitchen counter and turned, crossing his arms. He appeared to be considering Madison like she was a new feature he wasn't sure he altogether liked installed in his living room.
Boy, you really take the lone wolf thing seriously, huh? Madison said as she turned a slow circle, hands finding her hips as she studied her surroundings. I guess it's kind of romantic.
You must consider yourself a prince in exile to live like this.
And shouldn't you have security? Why don't I ever see any?
My home is not a gallery for you to critique, Vlad expressed. I'm not a wolf or a prince, and I certainly don't need romance in here. As to security, they are paid a considerable sum of money to remain invisible. I see no need to flaunt what is no one's business.
Wait, no romance at all?
Madison knew she should pay attention to what he just said because it was important. But she couldn't believe that he never brought a woman here. Granted, given who he was, this apartment was downright bleak. But never? Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Something fluttered in Madison's chest that she refused to acknowledge as her heart. Just when she thought anything might happen, especially a scenario where the Russian crossed the room and showed her just how much two people could do with so few available surfaces, Vlad exhaled and turned back to the kitchen counter. Well, any ideas yet? He asked her, in reference to her earlier play to gain entry.
A few.
Madison's eyes traveled down the length of his broad back, watching the way the thin material of his t-shirt hugged the muscles of his shoulders and the indent of his spine every time he moved.
Can I at least hang out here until the movers are finished?
Vlad gestured to the chair in the living room without looking. Help yourself. I was just going to make dinner.
I was thinking more of helping myself to your liquor cabinet, Madison admitted.
Her eyes fell from admiring Vlad's incredible physique to take in the fallen soldiers piled by the armchair.
If there's anything left, she amended.
Let's just say you aren't my first unexpected visitor this week, Vlad said, holding a bottle out in invitation with one hand as he continued his preparations in the sink. Madison sauntered into the kitchen to join him, taking the offered vodka and helping herself to the only glass. There was nowhere to sit in the kitchen, so she settled for hopping up onto the counter by the sink and pouring herself a drink sans rocks.
Oh, what's her name?
She inquired casually, not wanting to sound jealous. Crafty little Liza, Vlad commented. Madison's heart sank, and she set the bottle aside.
Her name is Liza?
Liza is the Russian word for fox, Vlad corrected as he pushed against her thigh to make room. Madison complied, scooting to allow space for his cutting board. She tipped her head back and tossed the drink down in a valiant effort to fight the burn Vlad's touch left with the one in her throat. So, am I Liza because of my hair, or for a different reason you'd care to illuminate? She asked dangerously. Vlad chuckled. I'm willing to illuminate only one question at a time. If you must know, the last person to visit me was my brother, Maxim. Here, he said, just as Madison opened her mouth to ask another question. He pushed something smooth and salty past her lips, filling her mouth before she could object. Kielbasa. You will have to tell me what you think of Russian sausage. You're a trained killer to the core, Karev. Madison's face burned at the obvious innuendo. Was this dinner or was this sexual theater? She chewed the sausage link and refused to state out loud how good it was. Definitely a killer, and don't you forget it, O'Connor. He's going to be the death of you if you hang around any longer. What else might he be? Oh, that reminds me. I have something of yours, she said. Vlad raised an eyebrow, as if to silently inquire what precisely it was that had reminded her in the first place, but Madison ignored his look. She hopped down off the counter and exited his apartment to pop into her own place next door. The movers weren't finished assembling her things yet, but they appeared to be taking a smoke break in the alley outside. Madison sighed with frustration, but didn't bother hanging her head out the window to shout down to them. At least the dinner jacket was still where she had left it, hanging off the back of her desk chair. Madison plucked it up and was just about to turn and go when a piece of paper fluttered out of one of the pockets. She paused, scrutinizing the folded note on the floor. It shouldn't have looked familiar, yet it did somehow. Why hadn't she noticed it in Vlad's pocket before? She knelt to retrieve it, peeling it open carefully, her pulse kicking up before she had even consciously recognized the handwriting within. It was the note from her father, the one she had delivered to Sergei's office the day before he was murdered, if Vlad was to be believed. And speaking of Vlad, the room darkened suddenly. Madison wheeled to find the towering blonde man standing in the doorway to her apartment, filling the doorway. He hadn't looked that big inside his own residence. His pale eyes fell to her occupied hands, and a terrible change came over him. Madison backed herself against her desk chair before she understood that she was retreating. You. His expression was thunderous. You stole it. The note.
What? She asked, perplexed. What are you talking about? I didn't steal anything. You gave me your jacket in case you had forgotten. Not that she tried to suppress her memories from that night. If anything, they were all she thought about when she wasn't fantasizing about them doing other things, and oddly, they weren't all sexual. Why do you have this anyway? She demanded, tossing the dinner jacket back down and moving into the room as she brandished the note at him. This was for Sergei's eyes only. This was a private invitation to meet with my father that he asked me to deliver personally for him. Why do you have it now? Unless... She nearly choked on her realization like it was a piece of kielbasa. Vlad's eyes narrowed as if he couldn't decide if she was putting on a show or not. You can't be serious, Madison exclaimed. Do you actually think I'm the one who murdered Sergei? Or do you think that I'm complicit somehow? Is that what this was all along to you, a part of your investigation? It made sudden, dreadful sense, the chance meeting, the repeat visits to her office, the additional security and cameras. Unbelievable that it had taken her this long to figure it out. She had been so taken in by him, by a Karev, the enemy literally at her door, the enemy who now stepped fully into her apartment and closed the door, locking it behind him. Do you deny you weren't doing the same? Vlad demanded. Why else would a woman with such clear disdain for the business I run agree to dinner with me? She saw a wicked glint in his eye and braced herself for impact. Why else would she agree to open her legs for a Russian thug?
The transparency in your own motivations is frankly embarrassing, Liza.
Go to hell, Madison shouted. She hadn't meant to pitch her voice so loudly, but she also hadn't expected him to go so low. Then again, the man before her was proving himself to be exactly as described, a Russian thug. I don't need someone like you telling me when and when not to feel embarrassed, and I definitely don't need him doing so inside my own apartment, she exclaimed. Believe me, I regret our date as much as you do. Her eyes darted across the room once more to the dinner jacket hanging off the chair, and she was struck by a terrible inspiration. In fact, why don't I make it up to you? Since I'm such a designing, manipulative whore, it should be my equal responsibility to help you avoid letting your dick lead you into temptation in the future. She darted across the room and snatched the dinner jacket up before Vlad could stop her. The window into the main room of her new apartment was already open, and serendipitously enough, screenless. Without another thought, she threw Vlad's jacket out the window. He rushed forward as she stepped aside. She restrained herself from looking, but thought she heard the telltale thump of the expensive article landing in the open dumpster below. There were unforeseen perks to living right above the alley after all. An ominous silence descended upon the room. The smug smile of victory Madison had been fighting back died on her lips. A siren wailed in the distance to match the one now going off in her head. Vlad turned his head slowly. The street light outside cast his own expression into a black tableau until she couldn't see past any of the shadows pooling in his rigid face. She saw his eyes, though. They glowed with quiet fury until the cool blue of them looked as if it could scorch her to a cinder on the spot. His pupils dilated all at once, and Madison's primal instinct kicked in. She turned to run. It didn't occur to her until it was too late that there was nowhere to go. Her hand was on the doorknob when he grabbed her waist, and Madison found herself lifted clear off the ground and hauled back into the room. "Let go of me!" she shrieked. He was a trained killer. Anything could happen. So, of course, the unexpected happened. Vlad turned her into him forcefully, and Madison struggled against him until the end, throwing shoulders and futile punches that he deflected at every turn. His hands clenched over her shoulders and pressed them down against her sides. If he was going to use them to restrain her rather than kill her then and there, then what? He kissed her punishingly. The heat of his mouth against hers, the aggressive pressure forced her to bend her head back beneath him to take him all at once. His tongue pushed its way past the seam of her lips, its strength as controlled and honed as any other muscle in his tense, powerful body. She opened her mouth against him with the idea to protest, but of course her hubris only enabled his invasion to succeed. His tongue plunged past her teeth to war with her own. There was no home court advantage here. He had her on the defensive, parrying and thrusting to keep up, engaging when she knew she should be pushing him out to enable a retreat. She had never been kissed so aggressively, so thoroughly in all her life. If this was the male response to being disrespected, Madison thought she could personally afford to throw a few more expensive dinner jackets out the window.
Sorry, readers. Here's where we fade to black due to YouTube explicit content guidelines. If you dream for the steam, you'll need to take a look in the book.
There it is, Vlad murmured as he pressed his lips beneath her ear to whisper. You want more? Madison's head was spinning. It took her a while to realize that the pounding of her pulse was in time to a pounding on the door.
"Miss O'Connor, you in there?"
One of the male movers called out.
"We're locked out."
"Good," she growled as she reached up to divest Vlad of his t-shirt. The Russian chuckled, his mouth sliding along her neck. It was dark in the apartment, but not dark enough to conceal the rippling musculature of the torso now bared beneath her hands. Vlad wasn't just strong, he was the definition of cut.
Every muscle was as sharply defined and convex as if he had been crafted by a master sculptor. Despite the wan light in the apartment, she couldn't always make out the difference between Vlad's tattoos and the shadows that pulled in the crevices of his unbelievable body. The pounding went away soon enough, and outside Madison could hear the moving van start. They would be back tomorrow or never with her things, but right now she only wanted the satisfaction his body could bring her. She pushed off from the sink, and Vlad withdrew his hand from between her legs to catch her as she jumped and wrapped her legs around him. He was so deft in catching her that he might as well have been anticipating the maneuver. So this was what it meant to climb a man, Madison thought as Vlad carried her into the bedroom. Well, the new neighborhood Liza was certainly up to the challenge. The Russian took his temper, his thunder out on everything that stood between him and his conquest. Her clothes were torn from her as if by gale force winds, the salvageability of her garments questionable after such roughness, but Madison was all too eager to return the favor. Seeing just how far Vlad's tattoos extended became more than a passing curiosity. It became an obsession. Her fingers closed over the wolf crest emblazoned on his bicep, wondering if she could draw enough power from it to endure what the animalistic man who wore it had in store for her.
Sorry, readers. Here's where we fade to black due to YouTube explicit content guidelines. If you dream for the steam, you'll need to take a look in the book.
Madison woke a half-hour later. She hadn't intended to drowse, but her body ached with delicious exhaustion. Vlad lay beside her, his naked body lounging atop a heap of discarded clothes. She had no way of knowing any more if they were his or hers. Maybe she hadn't been so far off base in calling him a prince in exile, she thought. If ever there was an image of tarnished royalty, it was this sexually sated son of the mob lying beside her. So, Madison rolled over to face her lover, propping her chin in her hand. Can I assume I'm off your suspect list?
7. Vlad. It's just sex, Dmitri. Vlad's brother had stopped pretending to read a while ago. Now he gazed up from beneath the transparent lenses of his reading glasses, as if they could lend a similar transparency to the world misrepresenting itself around him. You've been seeing this girl for almost a month now. Does she know that? Dmitri asked. Do you know that? Vlad wasn't in the mood to discuss his relationship with Madison O'Connor. It wasn't the reason he had come to the bookstore today. Yet, all conversation seemed to keep leading back to her. I just said it, didn't I? Vlad plucked the cigarette from behind his ear and pushed it past his lips, even though he had no intention of smoking it indoors. Let his brother squirm a bit with the possibility. Right, because honesty is a mafioso's strongest point. Excuse me, I've been gone for so long I'd forgotten. Madison valued honesty, Vlad reflected. She also valued his thrusting body behind hers, in front of hers, beneath hers. He would have been worn out if he wasn't so goddamn addicted to the things she could do to him. He didn't feel like relating to Dmitri that the sex was near constant, and that their time spent together was becoming almost indistinguishable from their time spent apart. It just came with being neighbors who enjoyed each other's company, Vlad assumed, even though he had no previous experience with an arrangement like this one. If they had dinner together, it was only to rebuild their stamina so they were ready when one of them inevitably pounced. If they quarreled or traded insults, it was only to recharge the air between them with the frenetic electricity that had become the hallmark of their sex life. If Madison chose to spend her time leafing through catalogs with the intention of helping Vlad furnish his spare apartment, it was only to liven things up by ordering new surfaces for him to fuck her up against. It all seemed terrifically simple to him. It was only Dmitri who was trying to complicate things. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep lying to himself, because he slept, ate, and breathed Madison O'Connor. What had started as an attempt to gain information had turned into the embodiment of everything he could ever want in a woman, and more. Here, his brother tossed him a book, which Vlad snatched deftly out of the air. Kama Sutra for Dummies, the title read. I thought you dealt in rare books, Vlad said as he let the trashy volume fall open in his broad hand. Recently, it feels like I deal more in hopeless cases, Dmitri remarked. Vlad closed the book with a snap, fighting to control an unexpected rise in his temper. He had come all the way here to have a serious discussion, but Dmitri still insisted on treating him like the youngest brat in the family and little more. I didn't come here to discuss the family business, and I didn't come here to talk to you about the girl, he said finally. I came to talk to you about Maxim. Maxim? Dmitri blinked owlishly. Why? He was just in here the other day. He didn't mention that he saw you. Vlad shouldn't have felt surprised by this. He wasn't even certain that Maxim remembered their encounter well enough to relate it. Then again, he couldn't discount the possibility that his brother was trying to cover his tracks. Do you trust Maxim, Dmitri? Vlad asked. Dmitri crossed his burly arms and stared at him for a long moment. Even beneath the navy wool sweater, Vlad could see that 5 years later his brother was keeping up with his old workout regime. Good. Vlad was fast losing allies, and he would need the strongest to remain with him if he hoped to survive his investigation. How well do you trust him? Vlad pressed his brother. I already know where you're going with this, Dmitri replied. And if you know something about Maxim that I don't, then you better tell me now. Is it his drinking? How bad is it? Bad enough to lead him to pick a fight with Sergei, Vlad said. Dmitri's severe expression shifted strangely then, and Vlad knew what was about to happen before the bell even chimed above the front door. He turned slowly, but even his attempts to casually take in the intruder fell miserably short when he saw Madison O'Connor. In the context of Dmitri's dusty old bookstore, the woman was nothing short of stunning. Her brilliant red hair tumbled about her shoulders untamed, evoking immediate memories of what she looked like between his sheets. She had just come from work, and despite the wildness of her hair, was dressed as conservatively as a big city librarian in a crisp blouse and black skirt. She made Dmitri, the true keeper of the books, look shabby by comparison, at least in Vlad's private opinion. Her face lit up when she saw him, her freckles racing to a mass on the bridge of her nose as she smiled. Hi, Vlad. I'm glad I got the address right. What's that? She asked, staring pointedly at the book in Vlad's hand. Nothing. Vlad immediately shoved the book among the nearest series of volumes, concealing the title from Madison's curious gaze. Don't shelve it there, Dmitri moaned. That's in the children's section. Oddly, Vlad thought he saw Madison flinch at Dmitri's words. Was it the mention of children that caused her to look so uncomfortable? Then again, maybe she just hadn't noticed his brother sitting behind the counter until that moment. You must be Dmitri. She recovered herself and joined them in the front room, extending her hand in greeting. Dmitri shuffled out from behind his desk to take Madison's hand. Then, surprising everyone in the room, he overturned it and kissed it. And you're the art gallery owner, he returned. Fitting that a work of art should be surrounded by her contemporaries at all times. Enough. Vlad inserted himself between them, forcing Dmitri to break contact as he steered Madison away from his brother. Let me give you the tour, Maddie. He hadn't expected to have such a visceral reaction to them meeting, but he decided not to question it. Instead, he led Madison further back into the stacks and out of earshot of his suspiciously grinning brother. Your brother is handsome, Madison observed. Vlad felt a flare of jealousy at her comment, but he suppressed it quickly. He knew he came from an attractive family. Even someone with a vision as bad as Dmitri could see that much. He had just never expected to feel in competition with his older brother again after Dmitri's defection from the family business. He's a nerd, Vlad said without any trace of generosity. Anything remotely creative he just said to you probably came out of a book. You called me Maddie, Madison said. Vlad glanced down at her, trying to assess whether he had inadvertently crossed a line. He kept his eyes hooded, his gaze impassive. But if his expression was unreadable, why was the woman staring back at him, smiling? Nerd or not, you're close to your brother, she noticed as she turned away to trail her fingers along the spines of the old books. Vlad noticed she was carrying a plastic grocery bag in her other hand. He had been so distracted by her appearance that he hadn't noticed it before.
"This is the one who left the family business first?" Madison asked, pausing to throw a glance back at him over her shoulder.
Let's just say he left with the least amount of drama.
"I think it's sweet that you wanted me to meet him," she returned brightly. "I really thought your family business was all that family meant to you."
Vlad sighed in exasperation. "Now you're misreading my intentions as badly as Dmitri," he stated.
"Seems to me that a guy who makes his living reading probably doesn't misread often," Madison pointed out. She stopped short in her browsing abruptly, and Vlad took full advantage of her pause to move in. He rested his elbow on the shelf above her. Madison backed herself into the books, placing her hands behind her back with a look of wry, expectant amusement. "I invited you here because I wanted to show you how safe you are with me," Vlad explained. He felt stupid as soon as the words had left his mouth, but it didn't make his intentions any less true. "There is more to the bratva than what you may have heard in those crime dramas you watch late at night. Yes, I can hear you through the wall." Madison blushed. Either it was a guilty pleasure of hers, or she realized just how few nights they spent apart these days. "Like it or not, maybe safe isn't what I want," she murmured.
Vlad watched the sensuous movements of her lips as she spoke. He was well acquainted with that mouth of hers by now, both on and off the battlefield, but he found he still couldn't get enough of it. He leaned in.
"No, wait. Bad segue," Madison said.
There was a rustling as she reached behind her, and she thrust a small box between them.
"Here, you keep half of these stocked at your place, and I'll keep the rest."
Vlad's brows knit together. "Condoms? I thought you said you were on the pill."
"I am," she said. "I have been for years, and you can bet I've never missed a day. It's just, never can be too careful, right?"
"You think I'm seeing other women?" he asked her.
"No," Madison exclaimed, bringing her hands up in protest and shifting the bag back up between them once more. "At least, you said it yourself. Our walls are paper thin. I think I'd know it if you were. God, I hope you aren't."
She gave a nervous laugh, one that Vlad ignored as he peered into the depths of the bag. "What else is in there?"
"Nothing," she replied, bundling the bag up quickly. "Just, lady stuff."
"I'll keep the condoms," Vlad said, "if you promise to keep some in your office."
"What? Like at work? At the gallery?"
Madison groaned as they came back out together from behind the bookshelves.
"You're serious, aren't you?"
"Deadly."
"That's the problem with you Karevs," she muttered as she rose up on her toes to bequeath him his kiss. "Well, most of you Karevs," she amended, pulling back to glance off toward Dmitri, who was rearranging the pencils in his desk cup. "You're deadly, and Shit, I'm going to be late for a meeting. I wanted to stop by home first." She cursed as her brown eyes fell to the men's watch that dwarfed her wrist. "Why don't you come by the gallery later and see for yourself how well-stocked I am?"
He enjoyed watching her walk back out the front door of the bookstore, observing the hitch and slide of her tight rear end. Madison paused on the sidewalk outside to throw him a knowing look over her shoulder, grinning as she dialed a number on her cell phone. Back to work and back to real life for the both of them.
"You guys even have the same phone," Dmitri noticed from further back in the store. "Was that intentional?"
"Shut up."
"Vlad," his brother said more seriously this time, "you can't have just sex with a woman like that. It isn't possible."
"Like you'd know."
Dmitri huffed in exasperation. Finally he said, "All right, tell me about Maxim." 8. Madison. Madison never thought she could hate a color as much as she hated the color pink. She sat outside the O'Connor Fine Arts Gallery, hunched over like a gargoyle on the steps,
thinking about all the ways she could eradicate pink from the displays and even from the outfits of the people passing by on the street. Savannah was perched on her shoulder as usual and speaking rapidly through the receiver. "It was pink? Are you sure?" "Positive," Madison groaned as she switched the phone to her other ear. "Oh, God, don't make me say that word again." "Have you told Vlad?" Savannah demanded. Madison would have shrugged had her friend been sitting across from her. It was how she would have preferred to deliver the news. Not that she was especially good at delivering the news. "It didn't come up," she said lamely, shifting a strand of hair back behind her ear. "Well, clearly, someone has been coming up." "You know, I really thought I could depend on you not to do the whole 'I told you so' routine," Madison snapped. "I messed up, and now I'm in a bind. My parents aren't the only ones unwillingly tied to the Russian Mafia these days." She put a hand over the receiver unnecessarily as an elderly couple passed her by. They stared openly and hurried in their steps when they noticed her looking. "Unwillingly tied?" Savannah scoffed. "You can't be serious. I may not be there in person, but I've got eyes on you, Maddie. If you're in love with a guy, just say so. I'm not going to judge. Much." Her best friend sighed on the other end. "At least say it to him, of all people. And while you're at it, you might consider saying a few other extremely important things." "I didn't expect to fall for him. Savannah, what am I going to do? The whole point of this was to free my parents from this whole mess, not tie them tighter with a grandchild. But he and it just happened. Many times. It happened many times and in many places. What have I done?" Madison couldn't help sounding despondent, even though she knew she should be happy. She was going to have a baby. "Well, sounds to me like you've fallen in love with a mobster." Madison could hear her friend's amusement in her tone, and she wanted to bristle at it, but she knew she wasn't making sense. How had things gotten so out of control? Madison watched as an unmarked black car drew up to the sidewalk. She heard the cascade of familiar shoe heels behind her and turned to spot her father hurrying down the front steps of the gallery. "Savannah, I'll call you back," she said, hanging up with a quick key of her thumb. It was Igor Ivankov, tall, bland, and non-threatening that her father had descended so rapidly to meet. Madison watched as the pair entered the gallery together. She waited until the car had pulled away and disappeared down the block before rising to follow. "What are you up to, Dad?" Madison murmured to herself. Her father did not look happy, and she didn't blame him. Prolonged contact with Igor Ivankov had a similar effect on her mood. Not only was he boring, he was often lewdly patronizing to her, to the point that she suspected he did not have a high opinion of professional women. The unassuming man with the tasteful pocket square collection was Sergei's brother, wasn't he? That meant he was Vlad's uncle, yet Madison couldn't think of two people more different from each other. She would have to remember to ask Vlad for more details on his uncle later. Whether her lover would be forthcoming with them was something else. Madison scowled to herself. Well, if no one was going to be forthcoming with her, and if she had no idea at the end of the day just who her allies were anymore, she was going to have to set her moral compass aside and inform herself. She watched as her father disappeared with Igor into the East Wing. Then she quietly slipped down the back hallway toward his office and unlocked the door. His computer password was the same as ever, Camille Passwordo. Madison snorted as she was admitted immediately to his desktop, feeling a bit guilty now for spying on the innocent, almost endearingly naive man who had raised her. But this is for his own good, she reassured herself as she clicked through to his email client. If Sergei was out of the picture and her father was still in over his head, she needed to know exactly who the enemy was. A quick search for Igor and Ivankov through her father's inbox revealed no more than the usual correspondences, all of them one-sentence confirmations to business scheduling on Igor's part. When Madison sorted by most recent emails, something far more interesting came up. She sat back, considering the name that appeared repeatedly in her father's inbox, then she hit print. She had not expected to see nearly 50 emails originating from Peter Franklin within the past month. Then again, Peter always seemed to appear these days when she least expected him. Peter? Madison was in the process of stuffing the stolen emails into her briefcase when she came upon her family's lawyer standing before a new display in the West Wing. Peter leapt back as if she had activated a laser field around the picture. Maybe she should think about getting one installed. He was standing awfully close. "Careful, you'll knock one of the sculptures over," Madison protested as he wheeled near the display. "Oh, yes, the sculptures. Sorry. Marvelous work," Peter stammered. He raised his hand as if to pat the leg of the nearest sculpture before drawing back and seeming to think better of it. "I was just on my way out, a financial meeting with Carson, but I'm afraid we had to postpone it." "Dad's double-booking himself these days," Madison noticed. Peter nodded distractedly. He was still gazing at the picture, but then his eyes cut to her. She sensed an opening and pounced. "Peter, would you mind meeting me here tomorrow morning before the gallery opens? Nothing official. I just have some documents I want to go over with you." The evening would give her time to read through everything and come fully prepared for battle tomorrow. She felt confirmed in one suspicion at least, and that was that Peter wasn't only playing both sides against each other. He had a higher stake in what was going on at the gallery, and maybe, just maybe, it had something to do with Sergei's death. Peter wetted his lips. He looked like he wanted to say more. Madison returned his helpless gaze with a flat one of her own, trying to ice all the warmth from her brown eyes. Finally, he nodded and turned, brushing by her on his way to the exit. Madison accepted his retreat, for now. As soon as she was finished perusing every correspondence he had sent her father, she would have a better idea of how willing she was to trust him. With a sigh, she turned and considered the picture mounted on the wall. It hung crooked on its frame. Odd. She hadn't noticed before, and she was always meticulous with how things were displayed. She reached forward to readjust it, and was startled when a piece of paper slipped out from underneath it. She bent to pick it up. Numbers, she puzzled. Madison was normally good with figures, but she didn't understand the arrangement of these. She turned the note over and spotted a name. Vlad, she read aloud incredulously. "You rang?" Madison jumped and whirled. Vlad was standing behind her, holding a bouquet of... Wait, were those roses? Had he seriously bought her flowers? Madison's heart began to hammer erratically in her chest. There was no way he could have overheard her conversation with Savannah, was there? "This has your name on it," she said. She could only handle one mystery at a time. "What is that? A love letter?" Vlad asked in amusement as he stepped up beside her. He studied the sequence of numbers briefly. Madison watched as the penetrating quality of his blue gaze sharpened with unmistakable clarity. The bouquet slipped from Vlad's hand and fell to the floor, petals scattering like droplets of blood upon impact. Startled by his reaction, she almost relinquished her hold on the note. But then his empty hand was gripping her wrist, and Vlad was half escorting, half dragging her out the emergency exit. "Are you serious?" she exclaimed, clutching her briefcase as he shoved the door open and pulled her after him down the steps. "I didn't write it. I found it," she protested as he bundled her into his car. She resisted only minimally. If a man like Vlad Karev was this unsettled by a set of numbers, then she wasn't dumb enough to protest his urgency. Where did you find it?" Vlad demanded. He had his sunglasses on, she noticed, and was reversing them back out of the alley. Madison lifted the note. The paper trembled in her hand, even though she had promised herself she wouldn't respond outwardly to let the Russian know she was afraid. After a minute, Vlad snatched it from her and single-handedly crushed it into a ball in his fist. "Madison O'Connor, please tell me why the fuck it is I always find you holding a note you shouldn't have." Her fear dissipated all at once, and her temper at being spoken to in such a tone of voice threatened to boil over completely. She glared at Vlad's tattooed hands now gripped around the steering wheel, noticing and simultaneously dismissing the way the flesh beneath the designs that mapped his knuckles bleached as white as bone. "I was holding it because I found that note behind one of the gallery paintings," she said.
A painting that Peter Franklin was standing in front of only seconds before. You want to know who wrote that note? You'd have a hell of a lot more luck taking me back to work and kidnapping him instead. They were parked outside the apartment building now. Soon enough, they were mounting the stairwell. Vlad pushed her up the steps in front of him like he was escorting her to a prison cell. For all Madison knew, he might as well be. On top of what he makes as a lawyer, Peter is paid extremely well by my family, Vlad argued with her. Why should I believe that he would write this note? Maybe I can help you figure that out if you'd just tell me what the note means, Madison snapped. She turned to brace herself in the doorway to her apartment, but she was still holding her briefcase. Vlad easily shoved her the rest of the way in and slammed the door behind them. It means there's a hit out on me, he exploded then. Madison blinked, the briefcase slipping from her fingers to fall to the floor with a heavy thunk. Its contents seemed less than pressing now in the wake of Vlad's revelation. She studied the man in front of her for a long moment. She had rarely seen Vlad's mask slip, and it was only during sex that the man she couldn't get enough of let some of his walls come tumbling down. I don't know who to trust anymore, Maddie. He gave a dark, desperate laugh, and the sound sent chills racing through her. My family? You? It doesn't matter anymore if you don't trust me. I want out. Tears sprang unbidden into her eyes. I want out of all this. When you came along, I lost sight of everything. I want my family out from under the thumb of your organization, and I want out of this. I'm trapped, Vlad. I'm bound to you, and I don't want to feel this way anymore. What you feel is what I feel, too. The Russian came toward her, but for once it wasn't to pursue, wrangle, or catch her up in his arms against her will. Madison fell against him the moment he opened up to her, wrapping herself in him, taking what shelter was offered for however long he thought to offer it. Maybe they couldn't express what was happening between them in words, but understanding came easily here inside Vlad's arms. He took her into the bedroom. They didn't come together in the bed often, which made it all the sweeter that he should take her there now, sliding her out of her clothes and then allowing her to undress him. He's making love to me, she thought in wonder as Vlad wrapped one warm, muscular arm beneath her and eased them both down into the embrace of the mattress. Have we ever done this before? It was a strange series of thoughts to be having in the moment, but Madison couldn't help it. Where once she had considered the relationship she had with Vlad to be fraught and unnameable, his tender, almost worshipful treatment of her now was enough to make her second-guess what she meant to him, and what he meant to her. What could this man, this black-clad, tattooed social outlier really mean to her if she allowed her remaining walls to come down? Too late, she realized that those walls had come down probably from their first moments together, but she'd been too stubborn to acknowledge it. She felt Vlad's hand between her legs, caressing her, parting her, and she sighed in defeated bliss. She wanted to be had by him, body and soul. She wanted to be possessed by the man who bent and broke everything that stood in opposition to his will. She let his mouth claim her own, and let his masterful touch pleasure her most intimate recesses. When he slipped his length inside her, laying claim to the space between her legs, Madison had never felt more fulfilled. They moved against each other, burying themselves in one another, until Madison forgot to fear her feelings for the man she had fallen in love with. Instead, under the cover of darkness, she embraced them wholeheartedly. The next morning, Madison rose early and got dressed. She checked the time on her cell phone before pocketing it without a second thought. She had about 10 minutes to get down to the gallery to meet Peter, and not a single email read.
Sighing in defeat, she moved into the bathroom, careful to carry her shoes and avoid waking the slumbering Russian, who had once again found his way into her bed. She couldn't let herself think about all the ways last night had been different. She couldn't allow herself to be in love with Vlad Karev. Madison gazed at her rumpled reflection in the mirror. She wetted her hands in the tap and attempted to smooth her curls down. When she dropped her eyes, she noticed the purchase from the store she had unpacked earlier the day before. With all the excitement of the past 24 hours, she had nearly forgotten the problem already on her doorstep. She couldn't bring herself to wake Vlad. She still had one last mission to complete on her own, to confront the man who wanted Vlad as dead as his father. And then Madison reordered the contents of the box, leaving them out on the bathroom counter, hoping and then pushing that hope aside. Then she quietly slipped from the room and out of the apartment. 9. Split. Vlad woke to his cell phone buzzing. He cursed in frustration and rolled over to answer it. He normally left it on silent, but he had evidently forgotten to last night. He raised the phone to his ear. "Vlad," he stated flatly, "someone better be dead."
"Really?" an acerbic female voice demanded. "You're answering her phone for her now?"
Vlad blinked. He pulled the phone away from his ear and read the contact name. Savannah. He didn't have anyone in his address book by that name. What the hell was going on? "Are you Madison, Savannah?" he guessed after a long moment.
"She didn't mention you were smart,"
the voice asked back to him. "Shit." Vlad drew a hand down his face as his brother's obnoxious observation replayed in his mind. "You guys even have the same phone." He turned to find the bed empty beside him. "I'm sorry, Savannah. I think Madison took off with my phone."
"Took off?"
The voice sounded perplexed now, maybe even a little worried.
"She doesn't work until later today. Did she say where she was going?"
"No." Vlad's eyes cut across the room to the briefcase on the floor and the crumpled note left on the counter. It hit him all at once. Madison still wanted out. She had said it herself the night before. Even if they had allowed themselves to get carried away by their feelings, that still didn't change the fact that she had a mission outside of her relationship with him, and that was protecting the interests of her family at all costs. And if that involved confronting the man she thought was the killer and gaining collateral with the bratva. "She's gone to the gallery," Vlad stated as he yanked on his jeans.
"How do you know that?"
Savannah demanded.
"What's going on?"
"She's going to confront Peter Franklin." He paused. "I don't know how much she's told you."
"Shit,"
Savannah swore, seemingly to herself.
"I know enough. Don't worry," she continued. "I've got eyes on her down there. If there's trouble, we'll know about it."
The line went dead. Vlad stared at the screen of Madison's cell for a long moment. Savannah had eyes on Madison. Just what the hell was going on? Vlad entered the bathroom hunting for a clean shirt when his eyes fell to an open box on the counter. He was in a hurry, but even then he couldn't fail to recognize the scattered contents in his haste. He had never seen a pregnancy test before in his life, but he didn't need to. Once was enough. Shit. Madison at gallery. Peter arriving now.
"I knew it,"
Madison whispered heatedly as she paced the floor of the West Wing, glaring at the phone in her hand.
"I knew you were spying on me, you son of a bitch."
It was all too apparent now whose phone it was she had taken with her that morning, but it was too late to correct her error. She didn't know Vlad's password to unlock his cell phone, but she could still see the banner notification pop up every time he got a text from Lucas. She couldn't leave now, so she settled for glaring up at the camera mounted on the ceiling, crossing her arms and tapping her foot. With any luck, Lucas softened would be able to read her body language and understand her complete disapproval of the little operation he and Vlad had set up behind her back. She considered flipping him the bird, just in case he missed a signal, but another set of footsteps alerted her to Peter's entry into the gallery. She turned away from the camera, ever conscious of her placement in front of it. She was going to use Vlad's paranoia to her advantage. On Vlad's camera, she would get Peter Franklin to confess to Sergei's murder. The rose bouquet was still littered at her feet, discarded and forgotten. Madison studied it, trying to calm the nervous beating of her heart as Peter's shadow detached from the gloom of the main room and approached her. She had to be strong for everyone she loved. She would protect Vlad, solve a murder, and earn herself the leverage she needed with the Mafia to get her family out of the criminal underworld, all in one fell swoop. "I found your note after you left yesterday," she stated without glancing up. "I know what it means." Peter stopped abruptly, still several feet from her. "You don't know anything," he stated finally. "And whatever you think you know, it's better if you keep quiet about it. I also know you've been in contact with my father more than usual this past month," Madison pressed on, undeterred by the man's veiled warning. "Since Sergei's death, the timing can't be coincidental, so tell me honestly, Peter, did you murder him?" "Did my father?" a traitorous voice asked in the back of her mind. Madison suppressed it quickly. Maybe her father had met with Sergei before his death, but there was no way the man who raised her, a man who locked his desktop computer with a pun, was capable of brutally ending another man's life with an ice pick. "You don't know anything," Peter repeated in a desperate whisper, although he sounded less certain this time. "You only suspect me because I lied to your family about my involvement with the Bratva. But there's more to it than that, Maddie. Believe me. I'm not just some double agent padding my pockets on both sides of playing the field. I answer to someone else. Someone who wants Vlad killed? Someone who murdered Sergei?" Madison demanded. "Who, Peter? Who?" "The FBI," Peter stated. Madison stepped back, stunned, and it was only after the admission left his lips that Peter came forward into the light. His eyes flashed so brightly he might as well have presented her with a badge. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came to her. No protest, nothing. She couldn't account for Peter's sudden assertiveness, like he had just dropped every mask he was juggling to finally reveal the face he had hidden from her for so long. "If what you say was true, then your emails to my father..." She turned it over in her mind, trying not to reel with the revelation. "Did he know who you were? Were you advising him all along on how to get out?" Peter inclined his head in a slow, non-committal nod. "The FBI is who I answer to, Maddie," he said instead. "But they didn't kill Sergei, and neither did your father. I know who did." Madison closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her forehead, summoning the strength to endure what she was about to hear. "It was Maxim Karev, Maddie, Vlad's brother. He was the one who murdered their father." When she opened them again, she saw a red dot emblazoned on Peter's forehead. Madison's scream cut through the gallery, but it only succeeded in spurring Vlad on faster. He pounded up the building's west steps and wrenched his way through the back door, just in time to see Peter Franklin fold and collapse backward in a pool of his own blood. "Madison, get down!" Vlad roared. She whirled. Even from a distance, Vlad could see that her terrified face was flecked with blood. His heart seized in his chest. Was she shot? Was she hurt? Was the baby? All other obligations flew from his mind, and in that moment, Vlad understood what was most important to him. He doubted if he'd ever forget now that he had finally found it. But there was no time to meditate on this new discovery. "Vlad!" Madison called to him, his name bubbling up on a sob. She looked about to run into his arms, but Vlad gestured swiftly, violently. Too late. Another shot rang out, but it flew wide and hit the sculpture to Madison's left. She screamed and ducked down, hugging her head as chunks of plaster and a glittering rain of something else showered down around her. No time to think. Vlad sprinted through the glistening field toward her, crunching winking lucid gemstones beneath his boots, heedless of their value, caring only about the immediate safety of the woman he loved. As soon as he was before her, shielding her, Vlad drew his handgun, twisted his body, and fired, his shots clipping the remaining pieces of jagged glass from the upper window. A stray bullet exploded the plaster head of another of the sculptures, and more precious stones rained down around them.
Are you serious? You were using my gallery to launder diamonds? Madison shrieked. How could you?
I knew nothing about this, Vlad shouted as they sought cover behind the platform. And is that really the question you should be asking right now when we're both getting fucking shot at?
Oh, God, they shot Peter.
Madison rocked beside him, and Vlad didn't need to glance at her twice to know she was in shock. Maybe he could afford to ease up with his own questioning, if only for the moment. He took himself away from her, only for a second, to lean around the side of the podium and fire off another round toward the building opposite. His bullets went unanswered, and Vlad hoped that his security had the sniper on the run. Whoever it was, they were working alone, likely under orders from some faceless higher-up, and the shadow of authority had told them to retreat. There were sirens wailing from down the street. Vlad turned and saw flashing lights emanating from behind the gallery's glass front doors. "Good man," he said, facing up toward the security camera. The light blinked off, an acknowledgement. Lucas had likely put in an anonymous tip to the PD before shutting down operations. Vlad would catch up with him later, but right now, he had more pressing matters to attend to. He reached down to lift Madison to her feet, and she came with him, unresisting for once. He tucked her beneath his arm and against his waist, half carrying her out the front doors and into the awaiting bedlam. Below them in the street, officers and agents ran this way and that, too busy answering the reports of gunfire from the other building to do anything yet but check the couple superficially for gunshot wounds and usher them to safety.
Savannah is on the Blood Diamond Task Force, Madison stated as Vlad maneuvered her between cop cars. She'll know. She'll know about the diamonds. God, what is going on here?
It's nothing for you to worry about now. You're safe. Vlad yanked a Navy FBI coat off the back seat of one of the open vehicles and settled it around her shoulders, shooting a glare at the young agent nearby who looked about to object. The boy snapped his mouth closed abruptly with a click.
Peter said it wasn't him, Madison was muttering. He said he didn't murder your father, Vlad.
I don't care about that.
He was investigating Maxim, she said in a rush. Your brother. They had an argument the night Sergei was killed about Maxim cutting ties and leaving the family business. Peter overheard them. He told me all this before he...
We don't have to talk about it now. Vlad steered her toward the back of one of the flashing cars. Savannah's on her way. She's been trying to call you. He held up her phone and watched some of the debilitating shock fade from Madison's wide brown eyes. She reached for her phone and he held it away from her. Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant? He asked point blank.
Oh, God.
Madison buried her face in her hands, her red hair littered with glass, or diamonds, or both, spilling past her ears to hide her sudden misery from him.
Yes, Vlad, I took a test.
So you left the kid out where I could see it, he demanded. He was immediately remorseful for his harsh words when he saw her face fall. He felt no less vindicated in his questioning, but the resigned expression Madison wore in the face of his fury made him feel the villain. It was a role he was used to inhabiting. Now he wanted to personally vanquish the person responsible for her misery. He didn't think his head could be more turned around than it was.
Yes,
she confirmed, eyes downcast.
I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. I guess I thought I could invite a reaction from you without mentioning it directly. I guess I thought I could know how you really felt about the situation before I spoke to you. I was a coward, I know that, but it was all so shocking, such a surprise.
Vlad exhaled sharply, a long gust through his nostrils as he considered the woman before him. No, not a coward. Never a coward, he replied. His fingers found the proud jut of her chin. He raised her face up until her eyes met his own. Sorrow swam in those familiar brown depths, but she didn't give herself over to crying. How do you feel about this? He asked her. Truthfully. He knew how important honesty was to her. He knew that now, more than ever before, was a moment to share truths between them. Madison half gasped a laugh of surprise, and he watched her open and close her mouth several times, seeming to decide to speak and then change her mind. I never imagined myself having children, and especially not now. I'm terrified. Her eyes took on a sudden steel that Vlad had never seen before. But you just said I'm not a coward. So you won't be surprised to know I intend to keep the baby. Just also know that we won't expect anything from you, she concluded. This child is going to grow up knowing he or she is safe and loved, no matter what. How can I object to those terms? Vlad asked her. Did you really think I would be angry? His expression softened as he gazed down into her stricken face. We aren't fighting, Madison, though I can't guarantee we won't fight in the future, he concluded, as his hand drifted from her chin to the soft plane of her stomach concealed beneath her shirt. He touched her with wonder, with reverence, knowing now what secrets developed within her. He understood now everything Dmitri had been trying to tell him. How could he have not seen it before? Everything that was important to him and everything that he cherished was standing right in front of him. It had been in front of him for a long time. The future, Madison echoed his words, blinking in disbelief. That's... Now the tears were no longer just a threat. They spilled over, wetting her cheeks and lashes with the crystal-clear evidence of her anguish. I don't know if we can have a future together, Vlad. Not when things are so complicated. Not when I can't reconcile the life you choose with the life I want for this child. There will be no reconciliation necessary, Vlad promised. I am getting you and your family's business out of the Mafia's line of fire. You'll have nothing to fear from my father's organization ever again. And you? The question ghosted past her trembling lips. What about you, Vlad? Do you intend to carry on with your father's organization? I intend to carry on with my investigation in whatever way I can, he said. The hand on her stomach slid to the small of her back, and he wound his arms around her waist, reeling her in tight against him. But as for the mob, I'm out. I've done my time. Enough time to know what matters most. Madison sobbed and buried her face in his chest. Vlad raised a hand, but he had no intention of relinquishing her. Instead, he cradled the back of her head, letting her hair cascade through his fingertips. He let the day's events catch up with her, momentarily overwhelm her, but he knew the tears wouldn't last. This was Madison O'Connor, after all, the object of his all-consuming passion, and now the mother of his child. There was no danger in the world he would allow to touch her life ever again, even if it meant he had to pull down the entire world in the process. I choose you, he murmured into the crown of her hair. Both of you. I choose us. It was the easiest choice Vlad had ever made in his life. 10. Split. Are we done here? Vlad's gruff voice demanded of the FBI agent sitting across from them. After PD had secured the scene, the agent in charge had requested that they return with them to answer a few questions. They had tried to split them up for their interrogations, but both Vlad and Madison had steadfastly refused to be separated. Even though Savannah had been forced to recuse herself because of her relationship with Madison, she did manage to speak on their behalf, and the agent had begrudgingly allowed them to remain together for questioning despite his complaints. Vlad didn't give a damn what the agent wanted or preferred, and he was prepared for both of them to refuse to speak without their lawyer present, but he'd worried that would take far too much time, and it was clear that Madison was dead on her feet. The adrenaline that had been coursing through her during the shooting had long burned out, and she was having difficulty staying awake as she struggled to answer the agent's questions for the third time. "I have a few more questions," the agent responded. "Now, please explain your relationship with the deceased, Peter." "We've already answered that ad nauseum," Vlad interrupted. Pushing his chair noisily back, he stood up, towering over the agent. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out his wallet and fished a business card out, tossing it down on the table. "Any further questions can be arranged through our lawyer. Now, if you will excuse us, I'm taking Miss O'Connor home. Even an idiot can see that she's beyond exhausted." Putting his hand on Madison's shoulder, he helped her stand, and her legs seemed to wobble with the effort. Swearing, he turned her before reaching around to scoop her up in his arms. He knew that Madison had hit the point of no return when, rather than complain, she wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her head against his shoulder. "Mr. Karev, I'm not finished. If you would—" The agent never finished his sentence before Vlad turned toward the door. Glaring at the young agent standing by the door, "Door!" he barked out as he held Madison against him. Without thinking, the agent pushed open the door, and Vlad quickly covered the distance to the exit. Savannah had been going through her own debriefing, and she paused as Vlad strode by. When he looked at her, she merely nodded her head, but it was obvious she was concerned about the woman in his arms. Walking outside, he had never been so glad to see his security pull up in his car. Jumping out of the passenger seat, his guard opened the door and waited while Vlad carefully placed Madison on the back seat before sliding in next to her. Once the door was shut, he lifted her back in his arms and held her tightly as the driver smoothly steered the car into the flow of traffic. He must have dozed, waking at the sound of the car door opening and closing. Security rode up in the elevator with them, and Vlad waited in the hall with Madison while they swept both apartments. Leaving the guards to their own devices, he carried his precious bundle into his apartment and laid her down on the bed. Starting with her shoes, he quickly stripped her down, chuckling at her grumbles of annoyance. "Shh, I'm almost finished." Pulling the blanket out from under her, he covered her as she rolled to the side and began to snore softly. Taking his own clothes off, he joined her in bed. Wrapping his arm around her waist, he pulled her against his chest. Even in her sleep, she nestled against him, sighing contentedly. Splaying his open palm across her stomach, Vlad allowed himself the luxury of dreaming of a future outside the mob. Closing his eyes, he pictured their children running around, boys with blonde hair and at least one little girl with fiery red ringlets like her mother. Snapping his eyes open, he realized that if his future daughter looked anything like Madison, she would need at least 2 brothers to protect her, possibly 3. Smiling, he rested his chin on the top of her head. Tomorrow was the start of a very different future for both of them, and he, for one, was looking forward to it. Leaning down to kiss his future wife, he whispered in her ear, "I love you, Maddie." And he thought he detected a smile on her face before he reached over to turn out the light. Madison woke slowly, wondering why she was so comfortable. Stretching, she was surprised when she bumped up against something hard. Opening her eyes, she looked over her shoulder to see Vlad sleeping next to her. Even in his sleep, the man looked as dangerous as he was when he was awake. Shifting slowly, she rolled over to look at the father of her baby. The last thing she remembered, they were at the offices of the FBI being interrogated, and everything after that was a complete blank. Could she have passed out? Surely not. The events of the night before had taken their toll on her, and she had fallen asleep. That had to be it. But how did she get here? "I carried you home and put you to bed," Vlad grumbled sleepily as he reached out to draw her into his arms. Resting her head against his chest, she listened to the slow beat of his heart, wondering if he had fallen asleep again. "And no, I am not asleep." His voice still sounded gravelly as she looked up at him. The sleepy smile he gave her melted her heart. Reaching his free hand out, he smoothed away her hair where it was covering her face. "What are you thinking about?" She wasn't sure how to answer that question, pausing. "So many things, mostly about the future." She felt him start to stiffen next to her and placed her hand on his bicep, stroking it lightly. "So much has happened in such a short time, and I'm overwhelmed at the possibilities. Clearly we can't continue to live here, at least not for much longer." Vlad rested his head against hers, and she could feel his smile return. "No, the apartments are very large. There's plenty of room to raise a baby," he offered as his fingers began to stroke her back. Lifting the blanket, Madison realized that she was naked. "Did you undress me?" When he chuckled in reply, any fight she had in her quickly melted. There was no way she could be mad at him for taking care of her. As she realized that, the butterflies that had been wreaking havoc inside her stopped. Ducking her head, she didn't want him to see her tears, but she could do nothing to hold back the sob. Grasping her chin, Vlad lifted her head to look at her, tightening his grip when she tried to pull away. Kissing her forehead, he gently licked at her tears as they fell, causing her to cry harder. Wrapping her arms around his neck, she hugged him close. "A house," she blurted out, sniffling against his neck. "A house," he repeated. "We are not raising this baby in an apartment. We need a house." She clutched tightly at his neck, wondering where all this was coming from. He shifted her so that he could wrap both arms around her, kissing the top of her head. "A house will be good. Plenty of room for boys to be boys." Snapping her head up, Madison looked at him. "What if it's a girl? Wait, boys? Plural?" Her voice ended on a squeak. Giving her a solemn look, "If there are any girls born, they will require brothers, plural, to protect them. While I would settle for 2, I think 3 would be better." Shifting uncomfortably, Madison was about to argue when her stomach growled loudly, causing her to blush. Vlad wasn't hiding the smile on his face as he sat up, drawing Madison up next to him. "But perhaps this is a discussion best for after you've eaten. The way your stomach growled, I am a bit worried for my safety." Madison rolled up to her knees and quickly straddled his legs before he could say anything. "For the record, Mr. Karev, we will discuss any future children beforehand," she bit out, diffusing her attempt at control with a moan as her own body responded to what she was doing. At that moment, her stomach growled again, causing them both to laugh. Lifting her off him, he swung his legs off the bed and rose gracefully. Grabbing his pants from the night before, he pulled them up before holding his robe out for her to put on. "Come, I'll make you breakfast." Joining him in the kitchen, Madison watched as Vlad pulled ingredients out to make omelets. Soon, the smell of sautéing vegetables filled the room, and Madison felt tears again. Seeing her upset again, Vlad pulled the pan off the stove and rushed to her side. "What is it? What's wrong? Are you in pain?" His concern was overwhelming her, and she wished that she could argue with him, the thought of which made her snort in amusement. "Madison, what is it?" She could feel him getting frustrated, so she quickly blurted out, "Look, I love you, okay?" "Well, you don't need to sound angry about it." Madison knew that she didn't want to fight, but she didn't know how to do this. "I'm not angry. Truly, I'm not. It's just... this was not the life I had imagined for myself, but in thinking about it, I don't think I would be happy any other way. I love you, Vladimir Karev, with all my heart." Madison waited for him to respond, and when he didn't, she bit her lower lip with worry. Looking up at him, she thought she detected a shimmer of tears, but he quickly shook his head, and when he looked at her again, they were gone. "Vlad, Before she could continue, he lifted one of her hands, kissing it. "And I love you, Madison O'Connor. I, too, cannot imagine a life without you." Dipping his head, He kissed her deeply, and Madison's stomach began to growl again. But first, you need to eat, because at this rate I really do fear for my life, he teased as he turned to pull plates down. Epilogue. If Madison O'Connor never saw another moving van, it would still be too soon.
Can you not set that there on the grass?
She stressed to the man in coveralls. Her hand sought out the distended swell of her belly, as it often did nowadays when she needed to summon reserves of mental strength. She felt the baby give a little kick in response. The mover glanced from Madison's face to her stomach and back up again. He switched the toothpick he chewed from the right side of his mouth to the left, his expression unchanged. Madison wanted to leap across the sidewalk and snap that damn toothpick in half, but was uncertain if she still had the agility required to pull off the move. She settled for being direct.
It rained last night,
she clarified, trying to smile through her clenched teeth. She wasn't sure it worked. What's more, she wasn't sure the mover cared about whether she was being cordial at this point.
So when you set the boxes down, the water leaches through the cardboard and gets everything inside the box wet. Dishes, books, undisclosed firearms. Do you comprehend any of what I'm saying to you? She finally erupted when the man took off his hat to scratch his head.
Lay off, lady, another mover advised her as he exited down the ramp of the van. We know what we're doing. Harping on us ain't good for the baby.
Excuse me?
Madison exclaimed.
I didn't realize I was in the presence of doctors.
It wasn't her finest comeback, and she was mentally kicking herself as much as the baby was when the weight of a familiar arm settled itself across her shoulders, its sudden intrusion effectively calming both mother and child. Madison turned helplessly, taking in Vlad's expression and surprised to find he wore a look of casual amusement. The movers returned to work without a word, although they looked decidedly less intimidated than Madison would have liked.
You're losing your touch,
she muttered, reaching up to grab hold of the tattooed hand that dangled limply off her shoulders. I have no interest in telling anyone how to do their job anymore. Except you, Vlad corrected himself thoughtfully. You work too hard.
Great,
Madison muttered, crossing her arms above her belly in defeat.
When we agreed you'd exit your line of work, I didn't realize you'd be putting your managerial experience to such effective use in our relationship.
The couple stood together on the dew-damp lawn, watching in thoughtful silence as their new life took shape before them. The house was a single-story structure with 2 bedrooms. Nothing fancy, but after living in an apartment for all of her adult life, Madison thought it was the perfect place to start a family.
3 moving companies, Vlad, she stated. 3! That's 3 that I've gone through in this city, and I'm not sure there are any more left. I swear, they must talk about me amongst themselves. I bet they get together wherever movers go for a beer after work and map out new ways to make my life miserable.
You're paranoid, Vlad replied. Trust me, it's a compliment. You won't sleep well, but at least you'll be awake and ready when they come for you in the night.
You can take the man out of the mob, but you can't take the mob out of the man,
Madison sighed in exasperation.
But thank you for the compliment, I guess.
You're welcome.
Madison burst out laughing as Vlad punctuated his words by sweeping her off her feet.
She was only 5 months along, but that didn't change the fact that she was weighing in for 2 now. Most days she felt gargantuan, but her lover still had a way of making her feel absolutely beautiful. Vlad carried her up the walk to their new home, brushing past several movers on their way out. Madison blushed furiously, knowing that after seeing her like this, none of them would ever take her seriously again. Let them do their job, Vlad advised quietly, as if reading her thoughts. If I can let others take on the investigation into my father's murder, then you can definitely take a step back from bossing around the hired help.
If it's on your mind, then let Savannah help you,
Madison pleaded as the Russian carried her into the living room.
Please, Vlad, she's only a phone call away.
Are you saying she hasn't already inserted herself completely into the investigation? Vlad asked as he deposited her on the couch. Because I hear differently. I may not be donning the suit anymore, Madison, but that doesn't mean I don't have my finger on the pulse of my father's organization.
Madison winced. So long as it's not wrapped around a trigger, she muttered. All I'm saying is you can trust her. There's no way the person responsible for Sergei's death is going to get away with it. Not with Savannah on the case.
I have a case for her, Vlad said as he settled himself down on the couch beside her. Madison inserted herself beneath his arm once more and snuggled close, deciding she could care less what the movers thought about PDA. A case involving sculptures mysteriously full of diamonds.
You'll have enough to worry about once we get our new insurance business up and running, which those same sculptures could have used, by the way. Madison sighed as she settled her hand on her stomach. I'm tired of mysteries, Vlad. I thought I could relax now that we're forging a new life for ourselves. But maybe we're taking on too much already. A new house, a new pursuit, a new little life to take care of.
I couldn't do it alone, Vlad admitted. He closed one of his inked hands over her own, a gesture meant to comfort and protect. Madison stared at that hand in awe. She would have never thought the inked hands of Vlad Karev would shield her from a world he had helped to make so dangerous. If loving her this fiercely was the lone wolf's penance for past crimes, then maybe he stood a real chance, in time, of learning to forgive himself.
You won't have to do it alone, Madison promised. You've got us now. We're your pack.
You're my family, Vlad corrected. He leaned in for a kiss, and Madison received him happily, winding her arms around his neck as he pressed her back against the couch. She ignored the crash of a dropped box outside, choosing instead to listen to the crash of her pulse, the racing of her blood, as Vlad caught her lips and carried her off in a moment of pure, ecstatic bliss. Whatever their future together may hold, Madison O'Connor knew whose painted arms were holding her. And for someone who majored in art history, she thought she could appreciate a complimentary piece when she saw one. This has been Her Ruthless Russian, the Karev Brothers Series, Book 1. Written by Leslie North. Read by D.C. Cole. Copyright 2016 Relay Publishing. Production copyright 2017 Relay Publishing.